As the first light of dawn touches the rugged landscape of Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, I stand among my fellow rangers, the chill of the morning mingling with a sense of anticipation. My name's Ko. I'm a park ranger who's walked these trails and climbed these ridges more times than I can count. Today, though, the familiar terrain feels different, shadowed with uncertainty. Ko, you are right, brah, a voice asks, pulling me back to the present. I turn to see Leilani, a fellow ranger and my best friend since we were knee-high to a grasshopper. Lanny's always been the kind of person who lights up a room, or in this case, the dense forest of the national park. Her hair, a cascade of dark brown curls, is pulled back into a practical ponytail. Her almost jet black eyes, sharp and alert, missing nothing, scan me for any sign of distress. I nod, forcing a half smile. Yeah, you know me, Sista, I'm solid. Just got a feeling, you know? My gaze drifts over the expanse of the park, the volcanic land that's part of my soul. Lanny leans in, her voice lowering to a whisper. I feel it too. Something's off today. You ever get one feeling when something not right? I ask. Yay. This morning, as I wake up, I see. Her voice trails off as she glances around, ensuring no one else is within earshot. She leans in so close I can hear the breath of her whisper. I saw something weird by the old lava flow. Like shadows moving. Not normal. But before she can elaborate, Captain Crucero, a robust figure with years of experience etched into his weathered face, calls the team to attention. His gruff voice cuts through the morning chill. Standing tall and imposing, he gathers us in a semicircle. Listen up, everybody, he begins, his gravelly voice carrying through the crisp morning air. Last night, the Geological Survey detected unusual volcanic activities on Kailaya. Increased seismic activity and gas emissions suggest that something's brewing beneath the surface. A collective murmur of concern ripples through the group. Mount Kailaya, one of the most active volcanoes on Earth, is a sleeping giant that we respect and fear in equal measure. Looks like Peel is stirring, Lanny mutters, referring to the Hawaiian goddess of volcanoes and fire. Her tone is one of reverence mixed with caution. There's more. The team leader continues. We've got a missing persons report. A family of holes. A woman named Sarah Jenkins and her two young boys, Tyler and Ethan, went for a hike yesterday near the chain of Craters Road and haven't returned. Alani and I exchange glances. The chain of Craters Road area is vast and can be treacherous, even for seasoned professionals, let alone tourists from the mainland. It's our job to locate them, Crucero says. We'll split into teams to cover more ground. He unfolds a map, pointing to various locations. We all huddle around to study the map. Sato, he calls out, his eyes fixed on me. You're with Lennox. He shifts his gaze to Lonnie. Start at the Kalapana Trail and work your way north. Keep your radios on and report anything out of the ordinary. As Crucero's orders sink in, a flurry of activity erupts among the rangers. The normally serene morning at the park transforms into a hive of focused urgency. Each ranger, aware of the gravity of the situation, springs into action. I turn to gather my equipment. As a seasoned tracker, my backpack is filled with essentials: a GPS, a detailed map of the national park, high-powered binoculars, and various other tools for navigating and surviving in rugged terrain. Beside me, Lanny, a trained EMT, is equally focused. Her bag is a compact but comprehensive kit designed for rapid response. She checks each item: bandages, antiseptics, splints, and emergency medications. As I strap my boots tightly, ensuring they are fit for the rough terrain, I glance at Lonnie. She catches my eye, offering a nod of solidarity. What do you think? Ko, She asks quietly, her voice tinged with the unspoken worry we all feel. You reckon we'll find them? I pause, adjusting the strap of my pack. In moments like these, it's not just about what you say, but how you say it. Confidence can be as contagious as fear in these situations. You forget who you're talking to. I say with a half smirk, trying to lighten the mood. I'm the best tracker on the Big Island. If they're out there, we'll find them. She gives a small laugh, the tension in her shoulders easing ever so slightly. That's what I like to hear. Let's bring them home. The early morning light filters through the dense canopy as we load the Land Rover, casting a soft glow on the rugged terrain of the park. The engine roars to life, and we head towards the search area. As I navigate the familiar route towards the Kalapana Trail, the connection I feel to this land pulsates through me. This place, with its rugged beauty and untamed wilderness, has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. It's more than just a job, it's a calling, a deep, rooted bond with the land that nurtures and challenges me in equal measure. Lanny, sitting beside me, is lost in her own thoughts, her gaze fixed on the passing scenery. Growing up, we spent countless summers exploring the hidden corners of this paradise, from diving into the crystal, clear waters of hidden coves to racing each other up the ancient lava trails. The closer we get the base of Kealia, the more evident the signs of recent volcanic activity become. Thin wisps of steam rise from cracks in the ground, a stark reminder of the raw power beneath our feet. Look at that, Lanny murmurs, her eyes fixed on a newly formed fissure, its edges blackened and sharp. The earth here seems alive, breathing and shifting with a life of its own. The beauty of it is both mesmerizing and unsettling. I pull the vehicle over, and we step out cautiously, scanning the area. The ground feels unusually warm under our boots. This wasn't here last week, I note, my voice low. The fresh lava flow, now solidified, creates an eerie, undulating terrain that stretches towards the horizon. We proceed with increased vigilance, knowing that the volcanic activity could pose a hazard, not just to the missing family, but also to us. Paths that were safe yesterday might not be today. As Lanny and I navigate the treacherous landscape, our eyes scour every inch of the terrain, searching for any clue that might lead us to the missing family. The silence is heavy, broken only by the occasional crackle of our radios and the distant rumble of the volcano. Suddenly, I spot something unusual in the distance. It's a small dark object, partially obscured by the rough, newly solidified lava. Over there, I gesture to Lonnie, pointing towards the object. Reaching the spot, a chill runs down my spine. It's a camera, half buried in the hardened lava. The lens is melted, warped by the intense heat, but the body of the camera is mostly intact. It's chilling evidence that the family we're looking for might have been caught in the lava flow. Moving cautiously over the rough terrain, we soon come across more signs of the family's presence. A torn piece of a map flutters against a jagged rock, and a water bottle, its label partially melted, lies discarded nearby. Lanny kneels down, her hands carefully sifting through the ash and debris. The somber mood intensifies as she uncovers a small backpack, partially buried and singed at the edges. It's a vivid red against the monochrome landscape of black and gray. My heart sinks a bit more with each brush of her hand, revealing the harsh reality of our mission. She looks up at me, her eyes reflecting sorrow. It's one of the kids' backpacks, she says quietly, holding it up. The name Ethan is embroidered in bold letters on the back. I crouch beside Lanny, examining the backpack. Inside, there are remnants of a child's adventure, a crumpled map of the park, a small toy car, and a half-eaten snack bar. Everything is coated with a thin layer of ash. The weight of our discovery settles heavily on us. As Lanny gently sets the backpack aside, we continue our search around the area. The silence between us speaks volumes, each of us grappling with the potential outcomes of our mission. Lanny carefully logs the coordinates of our discovery on the GPS. She then radios back to base, her voice steady but tinged with the gravity of our find. "Base, this is Ranger Lennox. We've found some items belonging to the missing family near a new lava flow. We're going to continue searching the area." As she communicates with the base, I can't shake a gut feeling that there's more to this. I decide to extend our search perimeter. The landscape around us is treacherous, a labyrinth of hardened lava and jagged rocks. Despite the weight of what we've already discovered, something urges me on. It's just a hunch, but hunches have always served me well in the past. The air is thick with the heat emanating from the ground, and the smell of sulfur hangs heavily around us. It's a surreal landscape, one that's both beautiful and brutal in its raw, natural power. Then, I see something that stops me in my tracks. There, in the middle of a large expanse of cooled lava, are footprints. Not just any footprints, but what appears to be a set of bare human footprints. These impressions in the hard, black surface look as if they were made when the lava was still molten, an impossibility for any living being to survive. I crouch down for a closer look, trying to make sense of what I'm seeing. The footprints are unmistakably human, each toe defined, the arch of a foot clearly visible. They lead away from the area where we found the camera and the backpack, weaving through the rough terrain. "Lanny," I call out, my voice barely above a whisper, not wanting to believe what I'm seeing. She finishes her transmission and hurries over, her expression turning to one of disbelief as she takes in the sight. "How is this even possible?" she murmurs, echoing my thoughts. We gingerly follow the tracks. The trail of footprints leads us further away from the barren lava field, towards a region where the volcanic devastation blends back into the lush greenery of the park. The footprints become less distinct on the softer ground, but we continue, guided by broken twigs and disturbed earth. Lanny and I push forward, our senses heightened. The forest around us is alive with the sounds of nature, but to our trained ears, it's what's not heard that speaks louder. The usual chatter of birds and rustle of small creatures seems muted, as if the forest itself is holding its breath. Then, through the dense undergrowth, I catch a glimpse of something unusual. It's a figure, humanoid in shape, but its movements are odd, almost erratic. The figure is covered in what looks like volcanic ash, giving it an eerie, ghost-like appearance. I instinctively reach out, gently touching Lanny's arm to draw her attention. My gesture is subtle, a silent communication perfected over years of working together in these unpredictable environments. We both freeze, our bodies tensing as we observe the figure through the thick foliage. Lanny's eyes meet mine, a mixture of confusion and caution reflected in her gaze. With a slight nod, we agree to approach carefully, mindful of the potential risks. The figure moves with an uncanny grace, almost floating across the forest floor. Its movements are fluid yet disjointed, creating an unreal image against the backdrop of the verdant forest. As we inch closer, the air around us grows noticeably hotter, a stifling heat that seems to radiate from the figure itself. The ground beneath its feet is scorched, leaving a trail of smoldering embers and blackened earth in its wake. The underbrush, parched from the recent dry weather conditions, catches fire at the slightest touch of the entity's burning footsteps. The intensity of the heat emanating from the figure is like nothing I've ever experienced. It's as if the very essence of the volcano's core is encapsulated within this being. The dry underbrush ignites with alarming speed, the flames spreading rapidly through the dense vegetation. Lanny and I exchange a look of alarm, realizing the danger we're in. The fire, spurred on by the hot, dry winds, quickly becomes a roaring blaze, consuming everything in its path. The forest around us transforms into a fiery hellscape within moments. The heat is suffocating, the air thick with smoke, and the crackling of flames. Lanny and I are forced to retreat, but the fire spreads with terrifying speed, cutting off our usual paths. Every direction seems to lead further into an inferno. We scramble over the rough terrain, the heat so intense it feels like our lungs are burning with each breath. We're both seasoned rangers, but this is beyond anything we've ever faced. I grab Lanny's arm, pulling her away from a falling, flaming branch. We're running blind through the smoke, relying on instinct and our deep knowledge of the park's landscape. The visibility is near zero, the air a swirling mass of embers and ash. We stumble upon a narrow ravine, the only viable path away from the flames. The ground is uneven, treacherous with loose rocks and steep drops. We navigate it as quickly as we can, but it's like moving through molasses. Lanny coughs violently, her face smeared with soot. I can see the fear in her eyes, a mirror of my own terror. Keep moving, I shout, more to convince myself than her. The heat is relentless, an oppressive force that seems to press down on us from all sides. I can feel my skin burning, the heat searing through my clothes. My throat is parched, each breath a scorching gulp of hot air. Suddenly, a loud crack resonates through the air, and a tree collapses mere feet in front of us, blocking our path. The flames leap higher, fed by the fresh fuel. I frantically look for a way around, but the fire is closing in. In a desperate move, I lead us down a steep embankment, sliding and tumbling over rocks and debris. Lanny follows without hesitation, trusting my lead. We land hard at the bottom, but there's no time to recover. We have to keep moving. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, we emerge from the smoke and flames, gasping for air. The world outside the fire zone seems eerily calm, as though unaware of the chaos we just escaped. We stumble back to our Land Rover, the vehicle a welcoming sight amidst the devastation. Climbing in, I start the engine, and we drive away from the inferno, putting distance between us and the haunting image of the fiery figure and the blazing forest. Lanny, still coughing from the smoke inhalation, manages to grab the radio and report back to base. Her voice is hoarse but urgent as she relays the situation. Base, this is Lennox. We've got a wildfire situation. The area around the Kalapana Trail is engulfed. We need immediate backup and fire containment units. As the radio crackles to life, and Captain Corsiro's voice comes through, tense and authoritative. Copy that, Lennox. We're mobilizing units now. Get to safety and stand by for further instructions. As I navigate the Land Rover through the park's winding paths, my mind races with thoughts of the figure we encountered. I glance over at Lanny. She's deep in thought, her eyes distant. What was that thing? I ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The image of the fiery figure, moving through the forest with an otherworldly grace, is seared into my mind. She doesn't answer immediately, her gaze fixed on the passing landscape. Finally, she turns to me, her expression serious. I think it was a lava walker, she says. Lava walker. I repeat, unfamiliar with the term. The term sounds like something out of a myth or a horror story. Yeah, I just made it up. Lanny admits, a slight shrug accompanying her words. It's like a skinwalker, but for volcanoes. Seriously, Lanny? I can't help but let out a skeptical laugh. Lanny gives me a look, one that's both challenging and serious. Okay, wise guy, you come up with a better explanation. What else could it have been? I open my mouth to retort, but the words falter on my lips. I don't know. I finally confess, the words tasting like defeat. The more I think about it, the more I realize that there are things in this world that defy conventional understanding. As we approach the rendezvous point, the distant wail of sirens grows louder, slicing through the tense silence inside the vehicle. The sight that greets us is a flurry of activity, fire containment units, park rangers, and emergency vehicles converge at the edge of the expanding wildfire. Captain Crucero stands in the midst of it all, a commanding presence as he directs the operations. His face is set in grim determination. As we pull up, he turns, spotting us immediately. His expression softens for a moment with relief at seeing us safe, before returning to its previous intensity. "You two all right?" he asks, eyeing our soot-covered faces and singed clothing. "We're okay, Captain," Lonnie responds, her voice hoarse but steady. "But we've got a serious situation. That fire is spreading fast and there's something unusual about it." "Unusual?" he asks. I nod in agreement, still catching my breath. "We saw something in the forest, sir. It's hard to explain, but it seemed to be causing the fire, moving through the trees like it was part of the flames." Corsiro's brow furrows, a skeptical look crossing his face. "Sounds like heat exhaustion, Sato. We need clear heads here." He gestures towards the medical tent. "Head over to the medics. Get yourselves checked out. If you're fit, I need you back on the line. This fire's not going to control itself, and we need all hands on deck." After a brief rest and rehydration, we don our firefighting gear, feeling the weight of responsibility on our shoulders. The afternoon sky is aglow with the raging fire, casting an eerie light over the park. We join a small team of rangers and firefighters, ready to venture into the heart of the wildfire. Helicopters and drones overhead coordinate our movement, but the journey is perilous. The air is thick with smoke, reducing visibility to mere feet. The heat is stifling, like walking through an open furnace. Embers whirl around us, carried by the hot winds, threatening to ignite anything remotely flammable. Suddenly, without warning, a massive flare erupts. A wall of fire explodes from the underbrush, fueled by a pocket of trapped gas. The force of the blaze is like a physical blow, knocking me off my feet. In the chaos, I'm separated from the rest of the team. I shout Lanny's name, but my voice is lost in the cacophony of crackling flames and collapsing trees. Panic sets in as I realize I'm alone. The heat is so intense it feels like my skin is blistering through my protective gear. My breathing is the only sound that pierces the relentless roar of the flames. Each inhale and exhale echoes through my oxygen mask. The world around me is a terrifying landscape of fire and smoke. Trees, once towering and majestic, are now monstrous torches, their branches reaching out like fiery claws. I stumble over a fallen log, the wood crumbling under my weight, embers scattering like fiery rain. My heart pounds in my chest, a rapid drumbeat echoing the chaos around me. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spot a figure moving through the flames. For a moment, I think it's Lanny, but as it comes closer, I realize it's something else entirely. The figure moves with an eerie grace, untouched by the fire that rages around it. As it approaches, the air around it seems to warp and ripple, the intense heat bending light itself. The flames seem to dance around it, converging into a swirling vortex of fire and ash. Just as the figure nears, a hand grabs mine, pulling me back to the harsh reality of the firestorm. I turn to see Lanny, her face obscured by the visor of her protective gear. For a moment, In the surreal, smoky haze, she looks alien, a creature from another world in her fire-resistant suit. But it's her grip, firm and determined, that grounds me, convincing me she's very much human. We can't stay here. Her voice cuts through the roaring fire. The ground under our feet shifts unpredictably, the earth cracked and uneven from the intense heat. We dodge falling branches and leap over smoldering debris, the air thick with the acrid smell of burning wood and ash. As we navigate through the inferno, trying to stay ahead of the ever-advancing flames, a haunting sound pierces through the chaos. At first, it seems like another trick of the fire, a howl of the wind, perhaps, or the creaking of burning trees. But while we pause, panting and disoriented, the sound crystallizes into something unmistakably human: voices, distant and ghostly, floating through the smoke. The voices aren't speaking in English, nor in the familiar pidgin that's like second nature to us. Instead, they're in Hawaiian, the language of our ancestors, a language we've heard in school, in cultural celebrations, but never fully mastered. Despite our limited understanding, the tone of desperation is unmistakable. Their cries for help. The voices, haunting and persistent, draw us like a siren's call. We exchange a glance. The same thought mirrored in our eyes: we can't ignore this. We push forward towards the voices, time being our greatest enemy. The ground slopes sharply, leading to a steep ravine that cuts through the park like a scar. It's a natural barrier, one that the fire hasn't yet crossed, but the flames are close, hungrily licking at its edges. Lanny and I cautiously approach the precipice of the ravine. The voices grow louder, clearer. They seem to be emanating from the depths of the ravine itself, rising up through the billowing smoke like a chorus of lost souls. Among the ghostly voices, Lanny catches a word that sends a shiver down our spines. Kapu, she whispers, her voice tinged with fear. The ancient Hawaiian term for forbidden, or sacred, reverberates through the fiery landscape, a warning unheeded by us until now. We stand frozen, the realization hitting us hard: we're on sacred ground, a place where the living are not meant to tread. The air grows heavy, charged with an otherworldly energy, as if the very spirits of the land are rising in anger against our intrusion. Suddenly, from the glow of molten rock and the charred remains of the forest, three figures emerge. At first, they appear as mere distortions in the heated air, like mirages born of the fire. But as they draw closer, their forms become horrifyingly clear. The largest of the three lava walkers strides forward with a dominating presence. Its body is a living tapestry of molten rock and fire. Flames lick across its surface, outlining muscles and limbs. Its eyes, glowing like coals, fix on us with an intensity that chills me to the core. Flanking the larger figure are two smaller ones, each moving with an eerie, fluid grace. Their childlike size gives me an unsettling feeling. The flames that envelop them cast their features in a grotesque, ever-changing dance of light and shadow. As they draw nearer, the terrifying truth dawns on us. These creatures, these lava walkers, are the missing family we've been searching for. The largest figure, the one that resembles the mother, extends a hand towards us. Her fingers, made of flowing lava and flickering flames, reach out in a gesture that's heartbreakingly human. Her eyes, glowing embers in a face of liquid rock, convey a mother's desperation. Even with our fire-resistant gear, we can feel our skin prickling painfully from the proximity. We back away slowly, our eyes locked on the haunting figures before us. An invisible barrier of heat pushes us back step by step. In our haste, we don't realize how close we are to the precipice. Lonnie stumbles, her foot slipping on the loose, ashy soil. For a heart-stopping moment, she teeters on the edge, her arms flailing for balance. Acting on instinct, I lunge forward, grabbing her firmly around the waist. With a desperate heave, I pull her back from the brink, both of us falling to the ground in a heap. I frantically search for any route of escape. Then, my eyes catch sight of a large, charred tree, its base weakened by the fire and the intense heat of the volcanic activity. I motion to Lani, pointing towards the tree. "Lani, the tree," I shout over the roar of the flames. Understanding flashes in her eyes, and without another word, we spring into action. I grab my chainsaw, a tool I carry for creating fire breaks. As I rev up the chainsaw, the roar of its motor cuts through the crackling of the flames, a man-made growl against nature's fury. The chainsaw bites into the charred bark, sending a shower of embers into the air. I work quickly, the blade slicing through the weakened wood, the smell of burnt timber filling my nostrils. As the tree begins to give way, Lani braces herself against the trunk, using all her strength to guide it in the right direction. With a final, forceful push, the tree begins to topple. We both jump back as it crashes down, creating a makeshift bridge across the ravine. We scramble across the fallen tree, the wood creaking and groaning under our weight. We barely make it to the other side of the ravine when a heart-wrenching scene unfolds behind us. The earth, weakened by the intense heat and the ravages of the fire, can no longer support Lava Walker's weight. The mother, still reaching out towards us, and her two smaller companions are swallowed by the collapsing ground. They tumble into the abyss of the ravine, their forms dissolving into the molten rock below. A profound sadness grips me as I watch them disappear. Lani grabs my arm, pulling me away from the edge. "Ko-o, we have to keep moving," she urges, her voice thick with emotion. We move swiftly from the edge of the ravine, the heat of the inferno still pressing against our backs. Lani leads the way, her familiarity with the park's topography guiding us toward an elevated position, a rocky outcrop that offers a vantage point. As soon as we reach relative safety, still shaken by the harrowing sight of the lava walkers being swallowed by the earth, I pull out my radio, my hands still trembling from the intensity of what we just witnessed. I know our immediate priority is to prevent whatever is back there from spreading. "Base, this is Sato. We need immediate air support on these coordinates." I relay the exact location of the ravine, emphasizing the necessity of a rapid response. The response from dispatch is swift and professional. "Copy that, Sato. Air support is en route. Hang tight and stay safe. Over." But pulling off our masks, we take in deep, desperate gulps of the fresher air now available. The sensation of breathing without the constraints of our gear is profoundly relieving. As we catch our breath, a faint, distant hum grows progressively louder. I look up, straining my eyes against the smoke-filled sky. The sound intensifies, a deep, resonating thrum that vibrates through the air. I catch sight of the unmistakable silhouette of a C-130, its powerful engines cutting through the chaos of the wildfire. As the aircraft unleashes its payload onto the ravine, a cascade of fire retardant billows down in a massive cloud, blanketing the area in a surreal pink hue. The inferno below begins to subside under the deluge, the flames dampened by the torrent of chemicals. Lani turns to me, her eyes reflecting a myriad of emotions. My hand reaches out, gently touching her cheek, smudged with soot and sweat. "You okay?" I ask. Without saying a word, she pulls me close, her lips meeting mine in a passionate kiss. It's as if she's always wanted to do this. In the face of the unpredictable and fleeting nature of life, she seizes the opportunity, knowing it might never come again. As quickly as Lani kisses me, she pulls back, a flush of embarrassment coloring her cheeks. She starts to apologize, her words tumbling out in a rush. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. Before she can finish, I close the distance between us, returning her affections with equal fervor. It's a kiss filled with all the unsaid things, the emotions that have been simmering beneath the surface for far too long. The world around us seems to pause. The crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of the emergency response fading into the background. It's just Lanny and me, surrounded by the wake of our ordeal. In the aftermath of the wildfire, the efforts of the emergency response teams gradually bring the blaze under control. The raging flames that once threatened to consume everything in their path are reduced to smoldering ashes and charred remnants. The missing Jenkins family of Sarah, Tyler, and Ethan are officially listed as tragic victims of the fire. Within the ranks of the Rangers and the emergency teams, whispers about the lava walkers circulate in hushed tones. But in the official reports, there is no mention of the mysterious figures we encountered. As the weeks pass and the charred landscape gradually begins its slow recovery, life for Lanny and I gradually returns to familiar rhythms. Patrolling the trails, guiding tours, and educating visitors about the park's unique ecosystem and geological features. Though life has seemingly returned to its regular patterns, there's an undeniable shift between Lanny and me that's impossible to ignore. In the quiet moments, when our glances meet, there are hints of something profound and unspoken that's blossomed between us. Despite everything that unfolded, I would never discourage anyone from visiting this majestic place. Kailaya, with her raw and untamed beauty, holds a special kind of magic that everyone should witness at least once in their lifetime. So, to those who wish to venture into Hawaii volcanoes, I offer these words of advice: respect the land and heed its warnings. And if, during your journey, you ever hear the forests whispering in Hawaiian, "Run!" The call came in just as the sun was starting to peek over the mountains. "Jake, this is base. You copy?" I grabbed the radio, my coffee still in my hand. "This is Jake. Go ahead, Sarah." Sarah hardly ever called this early unless it was urgent. "We've got a missing person, Alex Reed. His emergency beacon went off around 3:00 a.m. near Mount Chester. Then it went dead. My stomach tightened. Alex, he had been warned about the restricted areas so many times. Did he call back after?" "Negative. His car's at the Thunder Lake Park trailhead. The cops found his logbook. Something about following the wolf's path to the treasure. Ring any bells?" I rubbed my eyes. The last time I saw Alex was 3 days ago in the visitor center parking lot. "Yeah," I said, recalling our last encounter. "Jake, you need to hear this," Alex had said, holding up a beat-up journal. "The containers, the maps, the symbols. It all points to the gulch. Have you ever seen anything like this?" "Not yet," I replied, grabbing my gear from my locker. "Weather station says clouds are rolling in. We've got maybe 6 hours before the storm hits." "Great, just great," I muttered now to Sarah. "I'm heading out. I'll keep you posted on Channel 3. I gathered my gear, making sure I had everything for a few days in the wilderness. I was worried but trying not to panic. My brother had gone down these conspiracy rabbit holes before, and he always came out okay. But this time felt different. His words echoed in my mind. "The wolves know, Jake. They're guarding something. I've seen their eyes in the dark. They're not normal wolves." The drive to Thunder Lake trailhead took under an hour. I found Alex's Jeep in the lot. Inside, I saw scattered maps, empty energy drink cans, and his tablet displaying a topo map of Mount Chester. "Dispatch, this is Jake. I'm at the vehicle. Starting track west toward the gulch." "Copy that. Be advised, we've had reports of increased wolf activity in that area in the past week. Of course, I thought, because this day wasn't already complicated enough. The trail was easy to follow at first, but then Alex had taken a sharp left, following a game trail into the brush. Just like him, I thought, always taking the most direct route, even if it was the hardest and most dangerous. I followed his tracks for another half hour. He was moving fast, not taking his time to navigate safely. Several times I had to double back where he'd gone down steep hills. There were signs of his reckless passage everywhere. A wolf howled in the distance, not that far off. I checked my watch, 8:45 a.m. Dispatch, I've got activity in Sector 7. Any rangers nearby? Only static. I tried again and again. Nothing. The trail got even more treacherous. Alex's footprints were more recent here. I was getting closer, maybe just a few hours behind him. Another wolf howl, this one answered by several more from all directions. I took my rifle off my shoulder and held it ready. Then I saw something strange up ahead. Alex. I called out. Alex, read. I heard a stick break behind me. I turned and saw a pair of glowing eyes. A massive wolf stepped into view, its eyes reflecting the dim light. It was huge, reaching up to my waist, with dark gray fur. The creature and I stared at each other. Base, this is Jake. I have pork. My voice trailed off. The radio at my hip was no longer making any sound. No static, nothing. The wolf cocked its head, as if confused. The rest of the pack emerged from the fog behind it, standing in perfect formation. Then I heard Alex's voice from above. Jake, are you there? You have to see this. They showed me something. Something that can't be real, Bob. The alpha wolf took a step forward. I knew that if I followed it up the cliff, everything would change. I just had to decide if I was ready for that. I took a deep breath and followed the wolf up the cliff face. We climbed for several minutes. It was getting darker, and the air was getting colder. There was a tension, a feeling like something big was about to happen. The alpha wolf looked at me for a second, then led me toward a small opening in the rock. The other wolves disappeared into the fog, leaving only the alpha to guide me, if that's what it was doing. Jake, you coming, man? Alex called again. He sounded excited, just like he had so many times before. I kept my rifle at a low ready and followed the wolf, thinking of all the times I'd found Alex in a place like this, looking for something. Most of the time, it was nothing. But occasionally, it was some ancient petroglyph or a piece of metal he'd found, and he'd get all worked up, thinking it was part of some ancient treasure or a lost civilization. The crevice led to a series of switchbacks that took us up the canyon wall. The alpha was moving slowly now, like it wanted me to keep up. Its fur had a strange metallic sheen that I hadn't noticed before. Remember Eagle Cliff? I yelled up to Alex, trying to keep him talking as I climbed. One, you were sure you'd found a Ute burial chamber. This is different, he yelled back. This is real. I've been telling the truth, Jake. The containers, the wolves, everything. It became more and more dangerous, with steep drops on one side and sheer rock on the other. The alpha seemed to float across the rocky landscape, easily going over parts that I had to scale with my hands and feet. Like that real Spanish gold cache you found last spring? I asked, trying to keep my voice light but feeling my chest tighten as I remembered dragging him out of that collapsed mine shaft, the one that turned out to be old mining equipment. You never could see the bigger picture, Jake, Alex said, his laugh sounding off. Always with your logic and reason. But they've told me things, Jake. Things that change everything. The wolf led me onto a small ledge and stopped, staring at me. I could see a cave behind it. My brother was standing at the entrance, and he looked different somehow. "What happened to you, Alex?" I asked. "You look." He laughed that weird laugh again. "No, Jake, I'm saved. The wolves, they're not beasts. They're guardians, keepers of an ancient power." I took a step closer, and the Alpha's eyes followed me. "What are you protecting?" "The containers. The ones I said I needed to show you." Alex nodded back toward the cave. "They're not buried treasure or Native American relics. They're impossible." Suddenly, the wolf turned its head toward the cave entrance, and a low growl rumbled in its chest. Not aggressive, but more of a warning. Alex's face went from happy to worried. "We have to hurry," he said, looking at the sky. "The storm's coming, and they only allow visitors during certain alignments. You have to see this now, Jake, while the gateway is still open." Part of me wanted to run, to call for backup, to follow the rules. But I couldn't. "What am I looking at here, Alex?" He moved away from the wall, and I saw a tunnel leading into the rock, with a pattern similar to the one on the cylinder. "The wolves didn't come across the containers, Jake," Alex said quietly. "The containers came across them, changed them, and now they've been waiting for someone to receive their message." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the Alpha's eyes began to glow even brighter, along with the flickering lights in its fur. "One more time, Jake," Alex said, offering his hand. "Want to find out what's really in your mountains?" I looked at the wolf, then at Alex, then at the impossible tunnel behind them. I knew what I was about to do was against every rule and regulation. I knew there was no way I could ever explain this to anyone, even if I tried. But a part of me had always wanted to know what was causing all the strange things that had been happening in this place. And now I had the chance to find out. I took a step forward, and the Alpha wolf began to glow. The world seemed to tilt and blur as the Alpha's light intensified, bathing the mountainside in a strange silver glow. Time stretched like taffy, seconds turning into minutes as the light pulsed in patterns that matched the tunnel walls. The storm drew closer, its thunder now a constant, low rumble that vibrated through the rock beneath my feet. In those endless moments between decision and what comes after, the afternoon light faded, as if the approaching storm had sped up the day's end, plunging the gulch into early dusk. The light from the Alpha wolf's face dimmed, and I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. Alex was already halfway into the tunnel. I was tempted to follow him, but didn't want to get too far from the entrance. A howl came from nearby, but it wasn't the Alpha wolf. It was coming from further down the gorge. The Alpha wolf turned to look in the direction of the sound, then ran off, leaving me alone. I checked my radio again. Still nothing. The clouds had grown thicker, casting shadows over the geometric shapes. "Alex," I yelled down the tunnel. Nothing. I could smell wood smoke nearby, which was unusual since most people weren't allowed to have campfires up here. I went back to the entrance and looked down into the gulch. A small plume of smoke was rising in the distance, about half a mile away. I began to climb down carefully. The path the wolf had taken was too steep to follow without falling, so I had to make my own way down, using some of the paths I'd found years earlier. "Base, this is Jake," I said again, mostly out of habit, investigating possible camp whereabouts in Sector 8 Point. As I got nearer to the source of the smoke, I started to smell something else. Something metallic and sharp. I saw a flicker of orange light through the trees and realized someone had started a small campfire. I gripped my rifle and walked slowly toward it. Finally, I came to a small clearing and saw the equipment laid out: the satellite GPS, the thermal imaging camera, and the tool for digging and finding metal. and I saw Alex sitting beside the campfire. He had a golden cylinder next to him, which was open. "He brought me the quick way," Alex said without looking up. "You took the long way." "Did the wolves show you?" He chuckled, the same strange chuckle as in the cave. "No, not the wolves. We keep calling them that, but that's not what they are anymore." I looked around, closer to the fire pit now. The ground around here was disturbed. It looked like something had been digging. "What are you carrying in there?" I asked, even though I thought I shouldn't. He looked up finally, and I saw his eyes shimmering in the firelight, reflecting silver like the alphas had. "The truth about your mountains, Jake. About why some parts of it don't show up right on satellite scans. Why compasses don't work properly near the old mine entrances." "What the hell are you talking about?" I said, but my throat was dry. "Let's get you back to base. Get you looked at, Dot." "Still playing the ranger, huh?" He grinned, but it was a wrong grin. "Still trying to keep order in a place that just doesn't allow it. Didn't you ever wonder why so many rangers were assigned to watch these areas? Why certain documents are redacted from even senior staff?" The wind picked up again, causing a strange electricity in the air. The fire dimmed, then grew brighter, turning blue. "The containers were here first," Alex said, his fingers tracing the gold exterior. "Before the first settlers, before the tribes, before..." He paused, cocking his head as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Before time was time. Another crack of thunder sounded. I should call for backup, I thought. But the radio wouldn't work here, and we both knew it. "Please, let me see." Alex's eyes lit up. He reached into the canister and pulled out something that hurt my eyes to look at, as if it was bending in on itself in a strange and impossible way. "They've been looking for a man like you, Jake. A man who can see beyond the veil and still follow the rules." He handed me the impossible item. "Here, they want you to have it bought." There was a flash of lightning, and I saw the eyes again. But this time, there were more. A lot more. Dozens of pairs of silver eyes watching from the woods, just beyond the tree line. Their beautiful metallic fur shone like liquid mercury. The alpha walked out from the trees and into the clearing. It looked bigger than before. It came to a stop between us, looked at Alex, then turned to me. "Last chance to turn back, Jake," Alex said. "Last chance to return to your paperwork and rules and sensible answers." I looked at the object in Alex's hand, at the watching pack, at the storm dark sky above. 15 years of ranging these mountains, and I had always known there were things I couldn't explain, things I'd written off or filed away in that part of my mind reserved for later investigation. Later had finally arrived. I reached for the object, and the world began to change. Time seemed to stretch like taffy as my hand moved through the air, each millisecond expanding into an eternity. The storm above held its breath, lightning frozen in mid-strike, raindrops suspended like diamonds around us. Then reality snapped back like a rubber band, and 3 heartbeats passed in complete darkness. When awareness returned, I found myself still reaching, but the clearing had transformed. What had been wild and storm-swept was now eerily still, bathed in the supernatural glow of a fire I didn't remember being lit. Its flames cast impossible shadows through the mist that had materialized around us. I reached out and took what Alex was holding. As soon as I touched it, I knew it was something unnatural. The firelight changed, and the air hummed with a frequency I couldn't hear but could feel reverberating in my bones. "Easy," Alex said, his silver eyes staring back at me. "I hear the first time you touch one. It's electric." It was hot and cold, smooth and rough, all in one, and it was impossible to look at. What am I holding? I asked. At least, I think I did. He was interrupted by a growl from the alpha. The wolf had come closer. "They're happy," Alex said, smiling. "They've been waiting a long time for someone else to see." It pulsed once, giving me a strange feeling in my arm. It wasn't painful, but it was like the memory of pain, as if I'd had 1,000 injuries all at once, but only in my mind. "Alex, I don't think we should." There was another pulse. Everything around me began to spin, and I tried to let go of the object in my hand but couldn't. "Just let it happen," Alex said. "It's okay." I was hunting in the woods, feasting on bloody meat, watching the stars move across the night sky, the mountains rise and fall. "Jesus Christ," I croaked, or attempted to. My mouth felt funny, like it was full of teeth, howling a cry of pain. I heard Alex scream and fall to the ground beside the fire, convulsing. I looked to see what was going on and saw him on the ground, fighting to get the object out of his hand. I was the wolf, seeing the lights falling from the sky. I was the mountain, feeling the metal bite into me. I was the wind, carrying the message to the world. "Make it stop," I said, but it came out more like a growl. The alpha was standing in front of me. The image of a wolf was replaced by something else, something that made my head spin. I instantly understood what had happened. The containers hadn't been discovered by the wolves. The containers had created the wolves. Alex screamed, and I dropped the canister. As it hit the ground, the link was broken. "Alex." I wobbled over to his fallen body. "They showed you," he said, blood coming out of his nose. "You saw it too." The alpha stepped out from between us, looking down at the object. The other wolves were all staring at it as well. "What do we do now?" I asked, unsure if my question was directed at Alex, the wolves, or the unfathomable being I just touched the mind of. Alex sat up, wiping blood from his face. "What now?" I asked him. "No, we decide what to do with what they've shown us." The fire went out. It was dark again, except for the dim metallic shine of the wolf fur and the faint glow from the canister. "The Rangers," I said, my mind slowly coming back to me. "The secret files. They knew about this, right?" He laughed a little, despite it all. "Some of them. Not everything. Not what we just saw." The alpha's ears perked up suddenly, and I felt a change in the atmosphere. "They're coming," Alex said, silver eyes wide. "The others. The ones who left the containers." I looked up at the sky, my mind going back to those memories of lights coming down from above. The alpha rubbed against my leg, sending a zap of static electricity through me. "Okay, Jake," Alex said. "Do you want to see how far the rabbit hole goes?" It started to rain, and steam rose from the object as the droplets touched its hot surface. I felt the world changing around me. Like the laws of physics and everything I knew about the mountains were being rewritten. And whatever was up there was on its way down to check on its investment. Rain began to pour down, and we backed away from the object as lightning crackled in the sky. The alpha growled at us, and through the rain, I saw dark shapes approaching. The standoff between us and the alpha had gone from tense to terrifying. Only a few minutes remained until nightfall, and those few minutes had passed while we were distracted by the object. Now we were surrounded. Suddenly, there was a loud feral growl that did not sound like any of the alpha's prior growls. This one sounded far less restrained and far more dangerous. I reached for my gun but found my hands still wouldn't work properly after touching that thing. More wolves began to come out of the forest around us, but these ones weren't like the others. They seemed larger, more deformed, almost as if they were growing and mutating. Their jaws were foaming with a noxious ooze that seemed to burn the dirt below them. Alex, I muttered. Stay still. The man was already backing away, looking terrified. It's not supposed to happen this way, he choked out. They said. One of the new wolves came into view. It was the biggest one, the leader, and its eyes glimmered with the same glow I had seen coming from the canister. But there was no intelligence in those eyes. Only hunger. The canister, Alex choked. It wasn't an invitation, it was a lure. It suddenly dawned on me that we weren't selected. We were baited. The Alpha stood between us and the pack, ready to protect us. But it didn't look nearly as powerful compared to these monsters. Jake, Alex said, run. The monsters disappeared from view for a second, only to reappear at the other side of the clearing. They were on top of Alex now, biting and tearing at him. Alex. I called out, tumbling forward, my instinct to help battling with my instinct to survive. The Alpha didn't hesitate for a second. It struck me with its body, pushing me backward to the ground. I saw its eyes, and I realized this was the law of the jungle. This was the true nature of the world, and it had been amplified by the canisters, perhaps. I saw blood and heard the fire crackling. I saw Alex through the horde of mutated wolves. He looked at me and screamed, but the sound was drowned out by the hungry growls. I saw his hand reaching for me, and I saw the look of realization in his eyes. Then, nothing. One of the wolves turned around. It was the largest one of them, except for the Alpha. It looked at me. I put my finger on the trigger, but the Alpha pushed itself against my leg again. No, it seemed to say. Watch. The wolf approached me. Its movements were erratic and reminded me of a broken robot. It stopped just in front of me. I felt its breath on my face. It smelled like metal. It looked me in the eyes, and I felt its mind touch mine. It was completely different from the mind I had felt when I touched the canister. This was a mind of pure hunger, and it was twisted and wrong. And then it backed away from me. I didn't understand why at first, but then I realized it had something to do with the Alpha. It had marked me somehow. They had taken Alex. They had what they wanted. They backed off and disappeared into the cave. Their eyes glowed in the darkness for a little while, and then they were gone. The Alpha looked at me. It nodded. It was as if it told me that I was one of them now. I had been marked. I belonged to them. I heard thunder in the sky. The storm was here. The Alpha's pack revealed themselves from the surrounding forest. What do I do now? I asked again, broken. The Alpha didn't answer me, but instead turned away from the fire and disappeared into the night. I sat there for a long time, staring at the fire until I heard a familiar voice on the radio. Jake, this is Base. Do you read me? I looked at the blood on the ground, at the canister. There would be no way to ever explain this. Jake, is it? I said. I need you to come. You'll need to bring the tranq rifles. The big ones. Because there was something out here in these mountains that was going to spread, and I had a feeling it wasn't just those wolves I saw. It took nearly 3 hours for the backup to arrive. I waited by the now, extinguished fire, pit, gun drawn, watching the shadows for movement as the moon disappeared behind the peaks of the mountains and the sun began to rise. The canister began to glow with a strange golden light. The radio went silent again, and I was left standing there, breathing in the cold air and the scent of blood, wondering what the hell I was going to do next. Think, I said to myself, growling the word. Think like a ranger. I looked around and saw Alex's backpack. I wanted to leave it for his family, so they would have something to bury. I took a step toward it. The canister shifted in my hands, and all at once, I could smell everything. No, I wanted to say, but my mouth felt strange, crowded with teeth. not this time. My knees buckled, and I fell to the ground. My fingers dug into the dirt, and I could feel the vibrations inside it, the life inside it. Not just the worms and the insects and the small creatures, but the life of the entire world. The beating hearts of every living thing in these mountains was in my ears, beating like a drum. The lifeblood of the deer, the elk, the mice, and the bears. All of it was in my head, in my veins, in my brain. The history of the place played out before me, and it was a history I had never known before. I saw the native tribes who had lived here, avoiding the caves and the canyons for reasons that had nothing to do with sacred and everything to do with fear. I saw the settlers going missing, not for the reasons we believed, but for reasons far more sinister. I saw the rangers over the decades, writing reports about the strange things they'd seen, trying to warn the outside world in their own way. My bones began to crack. I tried to scream, but it came out as a howl. The moon was up above, and it was pulling at something inside me. Control it, I panted, pushing myself up from the ground. Control. But it was clear I had no control over this. The canister continued to glow, and I was beginning to see things that I could have never imagined. The park was not just the park. It was an experiment that had been going on since before the beginning of mankind. I could see the first wolves. I could see the first wolves that had been turned into werewolves. I could see the aliens coming down from the sky in their spaceships, experimenting on the animals. And I could see the alpha werewolf, protecting the borders of the park from something I couldn't see. And I could feel my bones breaking, my skin turning inside out, my body growing larger. I was turning into a werewolf. Jake, can you hear me? My radio squawked, a voice speaking inhuman. I raced for it and grabbed it with my hand, which was now more like a claw. I squeezed it and crushed the plastic in my powerful grip. The light generated by the canister blinked once and went out. And suddenly, I understood what Alex had been talking about. The canisters found the wolves, not the other way around. They were designed to trigger the transformation in certain animals. The wolves were not the only ones. I roared in triumph, not in pain. My howl was not one of anguish but of victory. And by the sounds of it, I wasn't the only one who felt that way. The alpha's howl was loud in the distance, much closer than I would have expected. They were coming back, and they weren't coming to kill me. My radio crackled and died as I lost the last traces of my humanity. There would be no backup coming for me. No more reports. Tomorrow they would find my clothes in the clearing, and that would be it. Maybe they'd find some tracks leading into the woods, and some of them would make a guess as to what had happened. But there was no way to know for sure. It would be just one more unsolved case to add to the pile. One more story to tell around the campfire. But tonight, I would be running alongside the pack, protecting the park from the outside world, and the outside world from the park, keeping the wolves from spreading the disease, and the disease from spreading to the wolves. I picked up the scent of the alpha and followed it into the woods, leaving my clothes and my old life behind. The night was full of possibilities. I could sense the presence of the other wolves, and I knew that they would soon be mine to command. The alpha would be the first to welcome me into the pack. I would run with them, learn from them, and in time, I would become one of them. And once I had learned everything there was to know about being a wolf, I would take my place as their leader, and I would hunt down those deer. The sun rose slowly over the mountains, casting long shadows across the forest floor. It had been a long night, and I had spent most of it running through the woods, chasing after the pack. I didn't remember much of it, but I had a feeling that I had enjoyed it. It had been exhilarating in a way, but now that the sun was up, I started to feel more like myself again. I managed to find my way back to the clearing where it all started. The moonlight dimmed, and I was on my hands and knees in the field, naked. My shredded clothing was nearby, and I was covered in dirt and blood. My fingers were crusted with mud and dried blood as well. The canister was in front of me, the top torn off. The papers were surrounding me. Some of them were shredded, others remained intact. I picked up one of the intact ones. "Don't," I said out loud, but my hand was already touching it. The pattern still moved, but I didn't feel the same connection to them as I had earlier. "Base to Jake, do you read me?" Sarah asked through the mangled radio, her voice faint. "We're sending in backup. What's your location?" I looked at the radio, not sure how to answer that. I still had a metallic taste on my tongue and wasn't sure if it was my blood or not. "Jake," I said at last, my voice hoarse. "Alex Reed confirmed deceased. Killed by animal." There was static for a few seconds before she responded. "Copy that. What are the injuries?" I thought about the blood and the monsters, and my brain tried to block out the memories. Multiple. Numerous attackers. That wasn't quite right, but it would have to do. Big dogs. Potentially rabid. Another pause, then, "Did you discharge your weapon?" "Negative." I looked over at my rifle, still on the ground where I'd left it. "I was taken out of commission. Support is on the way. You are not to follow or engage. Is that understood?" "Hunter." I scoffed at that. Whatever had taken Alex had nothing to do with anything man-made. "Jake," Sarah said again, but more casual this time. "Are you sure you're all right?" I glanced at my hands again. Everything was different now. The moon was still calling to me. "I'm good," I said. Just get the teams." I picked up another paper from the canister, only partly burned. The symbols on it seemed to move, to change. I should throw them in the fire, I thought. Burn them all. But I couldn't. A part of me wanted to know. Just like Alex, just like all the other people who had been drawn to this place. "They're going to come back," I said, even though Sarah was already gone. "The messed up ones. They're going to want more." As if to answer my question, a howl came from the canyon behind me. It wasn't the Alpha's howl, though. It was one of the corrupted ones. I shivered at the thought of what they could do to me in my current state. I remembered the state we had found Alex in. What if they did that to me? The thought of those sharp teeth digging into my flesh made me shiver with fear. There was plenty of evidence to suggest that a struggle had taken place there. There was the remains of my uniform, the broken radio, and the pool of blood. But that didn't mean that I had to convince anyone of what had truly happened. I would report the incident just like everyone else did in these situations. I would tell the truth, knowing that the truth wasn't enough to explain what had happened. "I'm so sorry, Alex," I muttered as I picked up the last of the canister's contents. "I should have believed you." I heard a howl again, closer this time. There was a part of me that wanted to howl back, but I stifled it, clenching the bed sheets tightly. Sarah's voice came on the radio again. "Teams are 15 minutes out. Can you make it to the access road?" I looked at the trees and saw the pack was still out there. They were watching me, waiting to see what I would do. "No," I replied. "I'm staying here. Just tell them to bring lights. Lots of lights. Because something dark was stalking these mountains, wearing the skin of a wolf. And now I knew what they were hunting." I took Alex's backpack, my own shredded uniform, anything that might help explain what had happened here. I poured the contents of the canister into an evidence bag, with a feeling that it would not help to explain things. Then I went to the place where I had met the rescue teams and waited for them to find me. I touched my face, feeling the lingering effects of what I had become. The transformation had reversed, but I could sense it was still there, waiting to resurface. Just like the Alpha Pack, waiting for the next time I ventured into these woods. It would be a long time before the sun rose, and I had a lot of explaining to do. The long night was not over yet. It took several more hours before the floodlights arrived, along with the rest of the search parties. They interviewed me and asked me questions, but I barely remember any of it. I had to stay there until the morning, and I watched the stars disappear from the sky as I considered everything that had happened and what I would do next, and what I would do after that. I didn't want to stay out in the forest any longer than I had to, so I tried to make a signal fire right there in the clearing, but I couldn't get it started. The best I could manage was a little flicker of flame, but it didn't produce nearly enough smoke to be seen from a helicopter. I grabbed the flare gun and fired off 3 rounds in succession. The international distress signal for SOS. Base, this is Jake. I cuffed and tried again. Base, flares are out. Same location as before. Roger that, Jake. Support is en route. Sit tight. I took note of his backpack, which he had placed carefully on the ground a few feet away from the gruesome scene. There was something shiny sticking out of the side of it. A compass. You, Alex, I muttered, tears in my eyes. You just couldn't leave it alone, could you? I heard a twig snap and turned around. I thought of grabbing my rifle, but remembered it was all the way over there. The Alpha appeared at the edge of the tree line. Its eyes had lost some of their glow, but they were still eerily bright. Here to admire your work. I was borderline feral, the old ranger code doing battle with urges I had yet to master. It came forward and stopped just at the end of the red soil. It bowed its head before looking up at me with those eyes again. I don't know what to do with this, I said softly. Any of it. My radio buzzed. Jake, be advised, first team 5 minutes out. Any sign of hostile wildlife? The Alpha's ears twitched at the voice, and I saw its fur shimmer with that strange metallic hue, just like my skin had. No, I said, still looking at the wolf. I don't see anything. The beast's ears perked up as it heard something I couldn't detect, and it began to growl. They're coming back, aren't they? I asked, already knowing the answer. The twisted ones. The wolf just turned around and disappeared back into the forest. I stood there for a long time, trying to figure out how I was going to explain all of this to the others. Base, just a heads up, I said. There's going to be some weird in my report. Copy that? Sarah said after a few seconds. Director Wilson is on his way. He requests that any strange objects be bagged for his inspection. I glanced at the bag, at the impossible symbols. Understood. The helicopter came into view, its spotlight casting eerie shadows across the clearing as it landed. I caught sight of something at the edge of the forest. A pair of glowing eyes. A hint of a snarl. The Alpha's pack hadn't left me. They were watching, waiting to see how I would handle the aftermath. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. I would have to deal with my new reality, but not right now. First, I had to make sure the truth didn't come out. The helicopter touched down, and I prepared to meet my colleagues. To face them as a ranger who had just witnessed a massacre, and not as the monster I was destined to become. Let's give them the truth they deserve, I said to myself, but not the whole truth. I heard a howl coming from behind me. It wasn't a howl of a hunt or a howl of warning. It was a howl of reminder. I was part of their world now, and they were part of mine. When the twisted ones came back, they would come back for more victims, more people to transform into their likeness. But this time, we would be ready. The helicopter pilot shut down the engine, and a dozen rangers with guns spread out to secure the area. I took a deep breath and turned around. It was time to explain to the investigation team what had happened. I had a story ready, one that would match the official version, one that wouldn't reveal the existence of the wolves, and by extension, the twisted ones. It was a story that would keep the three of us safe. The sun had come up, but the darkness had given me something that I never could have gotten in the light. 3 days passed as if in a dream. I was debriefed and examined by the authorities, and I gave them the answers I knew they wanted to hear. It didn't take long before an investigation team was sent out, and I was back at the same spot where everything had taken place. After a couple of hours, the sun began to rise over the trees, changing the shapes of the shadows. Even still, there were parts of the forest which remained cloaked in darkness. I had gone through several evidence bags before finding one which would contain the object. It kept squirming and moving, and the rectangles and squares of the e-reader were coming through the plastic as if bleeding through it. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of a helicopter approaching. I heard something moving behind me, but I didn't turn around. "Base, I see them, over," I said into my half-broken radio. "Roger that, Jake. Director Wilson wants this thing contained." I wanted to laugh. Contain what? The blood on the ground, the echoing howls that had no source, the memories of my body transforming. Roger that. A helicopter landed about 50 yards away, blowing the leaves on the trees with the wind from its rotors. A few seconds later, 4 park rangers emerged, armed with rifles. A forensics team also exited the chopper, dressed in white suits. "Hey, I'm here," I said, waving my hand. Last to emerge from the helicopter was Director Wilson. He glanced at the bloodstains in the backpack on the ground, then at my ripped uniform. "Rough night, Jake?" he asked. "Key West, sir," I said. The crime scene team was taking photos and putting down evidence markers, unaware of the fact that the blood they were labeling belonged to a man who'd opened a door to something far older than mankind. "All right, tell me what happened," Wilson said, leading us away from the commotion. I took a deep breath, smelling ozone and blood. Alex Reed entered the restricted area despite warnings. His emergency beacon went off at Zozener 300. I followed it here and found evidence of... I trailed off, remembering the things I'd seen. "What kind of signs?" "Big predators," I muttered. "Working in groups, but not right. Like rabies, but coordinated." Wilson didn't seem surprised by this, but he asked, "What about the canister?" I gave him the evidence bag. "Huh," he said, but squeezed the handle a little tighter. A young woman brought over what was left of Alex's jacket. "Sir, you might want to take a look at this." We followed her to where Alex's backpack was lying on the ground. She pointed at something inside the bag. It was made of metal, and I saw it was his compass. The needle was spinning in circles. "Electromagnetic interference," the tech asked. "Take it," Wilson said. "Take everything." I watched as they went through the evidence, but I knew they would never find a place to put this in a box. It didn't fit. "The wolves?" Wilson said softly. "Did you see their eyes?" I turned to him. "Sir, forget it." He adjusted his blazer. "I'll expect you to write up your full account by the end of your shift. Just the verifiable details. Observable facts. Like how the blood of Alex had steamed when it hit the ground. Like how those mutated wolves had moved in ways that defied physics. like how the moon had reached down into my DNA and pulled something out of it. Yes, sir, I said. A howl echoed from down in the canyon, distantly at first, but then more clearly. The equipment began to feedback, and the Rangers raised their weapons. At ease, Wilson called. It's just some wildlife. But he was staring at me with a look that said he knew what I was talking about. Sir, I said, about last night. Write it all in the report, Jake. He put his hand on my shoulder, lowering his voice. Some things are just better left unsaid. All right. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of responsibility taking hold. The sun was rising in the sky, and the shadows were stretching across the ground. From the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of gray fur in the underbrush. It was gone before I could get a good look. Jake, said Wilson, pausing to get my attention. Yes. If I were you, I wouldn't ask too many questions about what happened last night. Well, He left me standing there, staring after him. The helicopter took off, leaving me alone in the clearing. I stood there for a while longer, looking at the place where the bodies had been, listening to the wind in the trees. I had a report to write. I wondered what I should say about all this. Should I tell the truth, or leave it out? The ride back to headquarters was uneventful. I thought about what I'd seen and heard, trying to make sense of it all. It was a lot to process, and I wasn't sure I would ever be able to. But one thing was for certain. I would never look at the woods the same way again. I was completing some paperwork at the visitor center later in the day, filling out incident reports and trying to get the bizarre symbols on the evidence bags out of my mind. That's it for now, Ranger, Director Wilson said, picking up the pile of freshly wiped paperwork. I want you to take some time off. Think things over. I nodded, not wanting to try speaking. The sound of the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead was like nails on a chalkboard. Oh, and Jake, Wilson said, stopping at the door. Some of the other Rangers have mentioned that you're acting a little bit off. Try to fix that. Different. I thought of Alex of silver eyes and skeletal limbs crawling through the night. Yes, sir. I will. The visitor center was closing up for the day. Only a few people were left, and they gave me a wide berth as I walked through. It was as if they knew something was different about me, as if they could tell I was dangerous. I went outside and looked at the mountains, seeing them for the first time with my new eyes. I could see so much more detail. I could hear things I'd never heard before. The parking lot was almost empty, but instead of going to my truck and getting in, I found myself heading for the Thunder Lake Trail. Hey, nice night for a hike. Another hiker called out to me nervously. Yep. Follow the main trails. Make sure you leave before it gets dark. I responded instinctively. She passed by, whispering to the person she was with, "Did you see his eyes?" I didn't need to look in a mirror to know what she had seen. The change was still partly there, and it was obvious in my eyes and the way I moved. There was a shine to my pupils that glinted silver, and my movements had an unnatural, almost fluid quality. The trail eventually led to an overlook, a popular spot for tourists to take pictures of the mountains behind them. But I could see more than just mountains now. I could see the places where the world was thin, and where the old ones had left their mark on the world in ways that most people would never understand. Told you, man, I said, even though Alex couldn't hear me. You came to me with your theories so many times. The wind whispered through the trees, and a moment later, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Good evening, Jake. I turned around to see Sarah from dispatch standing a few feet away. Sarah. What are you doing out here? I was worried about you. That was a lot to witness earlier today. I wondered for a moment if she knew more than she let on. How many other people who worked here knew about these mountains? You ever ask yourself why some places don't appear on our maps? She frowned, as if that were a question I shouldn't be asking. That's what my brother used to say, before he started getting answers. There was a howl in the distance. Not the Alpha's pack, but a different one. One of the new ones. Sarah reached for her radio. I need to report that. Forget it, I said, casting my eyes back to the mountains. This isn't going in any incident report. There was a pause, then she said, the director told me you're going on leave. Just for a few days. I have to get used to it. Used to what, Jake? I let her see what I had seen. She didn't look away. To the truth about our park, I said quietly. To the real reason we're out here protecting it. A low rumble came from the sky, but it wasn't cloudy. Just be safe, she said. Whatever you found up there. Some things can't be unseen. I watched as she walked back to the visitor center, not even bothering to call in on her radio. The sun was setting on the horizon, and the sky was turning a dark crimson red. And I could hear the whispers of the night. The Alpha came walking out of the deep forest, looking at me. I watched it back. It wasn't a subordinate look. It was a look of respect. We were partners now. Partners in keeping this place safe from the powers of the night. I could hear the howls of the shadow wolves in the distance, and I knew they were on the hunt. But this time, they wouldn't get far. I took off my jacket and let the transformation begin. There was no need for me to report back to anyone. The story of the shadow wolves didn't end with me. It would be told by the howls of the night, in a language no human could understand. And it was true what Alex had said. The wolves knew where to find the mysteries of the dark. And now, so did I. The Alpha stood still until the sun had set completely. Look, I'll be the first to admit, I didn't want to go on this trip. The whole idea of booking a remote cabin at some Alaskan ski resort in the middle of nowhere, during the off-season, no less, was all Ethan's crazy idea. He'd pitched it to the group with the kind of over-the-top enthusiasm that makes it impossible to say no without seeming like a total downer. "Come on, Alex," he'd said, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "It'll be an adventure!" A break from the grind. It sounded good in theory. Snow-covered slopes, a roaring fireplace, and the kind of isolation that promised nothing but peace and quiet. But as our shuttle wound its way up the icy mountain road, past dense forests and sheer cliffs that dropped off into nothing, I couldn't shake the feeling that this whole trip was a big mistake. The cabin came into view just as the sun started to dip behind the mountains, casting long, jagged shadows over the snow. It wasn't anything like the glossy photos online. The wooden exterior was weathered and gray, the kind of gray that comes from years of neglect. A single porch light flickered weakly, barely cutting through the gloom. "Home sweet home," Ethan said, hopping out of the shuttle with his usual boundless energy. Mason and Cole followed, each lugging their bags through the slush, while I lingered behind, staring up at the cabin. Something about it felt off, like it was holding its breath, waiting for us to cross the threshold. Our driver, a gruff man in his late 50s, unloaded our gear in silence. As he handed me my bag, he muttered under his breath, "Be careful out here. Weather can change fast." I thanked him, but he didn't stick around for small talk. He climbed back into the shuttle, his tires crunching against the ice as he drove off, leaving us alone with the cabin and the oppressive quiet of the mountains. The door creaked open like something out of a horror movie as we stepped inside. The air was colder than I'd expected, and it carried the faint scent of damp wood and something metallic like old pipes. The main room was small but cozy enough, with a stone fireplace on one side and a few mismatched pieces of furniture scattered around. A narrow hallway led to the bedrooms and a single bathroom. "Not bad," Ethan said, tossing his bag onto the worn-out couch. "Definitely got that rustic charm." Mason, ever the practical one, wandered toward the kitchen. "Do we have running water? Heat?" Cole, always eager to keep the peace, chimed in. "It's not so bad. A little cold, but it's got character." I wasn't convinced. Something about the cabin felt wrong, though I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way the windows seemed too dark, even though the curtains were open, or the faint creak of the floorboards, as if the place were shifting under its own weight. Then there was him. He appeared out of nowhere, stepping into the room from the hallway like a shadow materializing from the walls. He was tall and thin, with a gaunt face and eyes that darted around like they were trying to take in everything at once. He wore a heavy sweater and jeans that looked a size too big for him. "You must be the group for Cabin 3, he said, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth. "I'm Silas, the caretaker." "He-Man," Ethan said, offering his usual friendly smile. "Appreciate you getting this place ready for us." Silas didn't respond right away. His eyes lingered on each of us, as if he were sizing us up. When his gaze settled on me, I felt an uncomfortable pressure, like he could see something in me that I didn't want him to see. "Let me know if you need anything," he said finally. "I'll be staying in the caretaker's room at the end of the hall. Don't go in there. It's policy." "Of course," Cole said quickly, his politeness almost desperate. "We'll let you do your thing." Silas nodded and disappeared back into the hallway. The air felt heavier in his absence, like he'd taken something with him when he left. "Creepy," Ethan muttered. Did anyone else feel like he was staring into their soul? "He's probably just not used to company," Mason said, though even he sounded uncertain. "Let's unpack and get settled. We'll hit the slopes tomorrow." We spent the evening trying to make the cabin feel like home. Ethan cranked up the old heater, which groaned in protest before sputtering to life. Mason checked the fireplace, making sure it was safe to use. Cole rummaged through the kitchen cabinets, finding mismatched plates and a single cast iron pan that looked older than all of us combined. I busied myself with unpacking in one of the small bedrooms. The walls were thin, and I could hear the others talking and laughing in the main room. Their voices were a comfort, cutting through the unsettling quiet that seemed to creep in whenever the conversation lagged. But as I tucked my bag under the bed, I noticed something strange. The floorboards near the far wall were slightly raised, as if something had been pried up and poorly replaced. I knelt down, running my fingers over the uneven wood. It didn't feel loose, but it was definitely out of place. "Alex, you coming?" Ethan's voice broke my focus. I straightened up quickly, brushing off the unease. "Yeah, be right there." We stayed up late, drinking cheap beer and talking about nothing in particular. The cabin was warmer now, the fire crackling in the hearth, and for a while I let myself relax. Maybe I was overthinking things. It was just an old cabin, after all, and Silas was just a weird dude. Not everyone was cut out for small talk. By the time we called it a night, the storm had picked up. The wind howled against the windows, and the trees outside groaned under the weight of the snow. I climbed into bed, pulling the blankets tight around me, but sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind, felt amplified in the dark. At some point in the night, I heard the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, moving from one end to the other. I told myself it was just Silas, but the thought didn't bring much comfort. I lay there, still staring at the ceiling until the footsteps faded and the cabin fell silent again. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the landscape blanketed in fresh snow. Ethan was the first to wake, his usual energy undimmed by the restless night. "Let's hit the slopes," he said, practically bouncing as he pulled on his gear. Mason and Cole were slower to get moving, but eventually we all bundled up and headed outside. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that bites at your skin but feels invigorating. As we made our way to the ski lift, I glanced back at the cabin. Silas stood in the window, watching us. His face was pale and expressionless, and for a moment I thought I saw his lips move, as if he were speaking to someone. But when I blinked, he was gone. Something about the way the cabin loomed against the mountains made my stomach twist. I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd stepped into something we didn't understand, and I was starting to think we wouldn't leave the same way we'd come. The morning sun, pale and hesitant, stretched across the snow, painting the world in shades of cold silver. We'd barely made it to the slopes before Ethan was bounding ahead, his energy undeterred by the biting wind. Mason, Cole, and I followed at a slower pace, lugging our gear while trying to ignore the strange weight that still hung over us from the cabin. Cole broke the silence. "Do you think Silas is okay?" His voice was soft, almost drowned out by the crunch of snow beneath our boots. "Define okay?" Mason said. He wasn't one to mince words. "The guy's definitely odd, but maybe he's just one of those loner types, you know? Lives out here for the solitude." "Solitude doesn't mean acting like a total weirdo." Ethan chimed in from ahead, turning to walk backwards so he could face us. "Did you see the way he watched us last night, like we were trespassing in his personal playground? He is the caretaker," I pointed out. "Technically, this is his turf." Ethan shrugged and turned back around. "Doesn't mean I have to like it a lot." The ski lift creaked and groaned as it carried us up the slope, its rhythmic squeaking adding to the unease I couldn't shake. The resort itself was nearly deserted, and the blanket of fresh snow muffled every sound, making the world feel eerily still. I could see only a handful of other skiers in the distance, their colorful jackets mere dots against the endless white. "Kind of quiet for a ski resort," Cole muttered, echoing my thoughts. "It's the off-season," Mason replied, adjusting his goggles. "Probably why we got the cabin for so cheap. Doesn't explain why it feels like we're the last people on Earth," I said, my breath fogging in the cold air. As we reached the top, the view stretched out before us, vast, untouched snowfields framed by jagged peaks. For a moment, the sheer beauty of it all made me forget my unease. Ethan was already strapping on his skis, grinning like a kid let loose on Christmas morning. "Race you to the bottom," he called, and before any of us could answer, he was off, carving a wild path down the slope. Cole sighed, shaking his head. "He's going to break something one of these days." "Let's hope it's not today," Mason said. Then he turned to me. "Ready?" I nodded, but as I adjusted my boots, I caught a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. Turning my head, I saw a figure standing among the trees below, a lone silhouette, dark against the snow. Even from this distance, I knew who it was. Silas. He was standing perfectly still, watching us. I couldn't see his face, but the way he stood, rigid and unyielding, made my stomach twist. Why was he here? Had he followed us? "Alex, you good?" Mason's voice snapped me out of it. I turned back to him, forcing a smile. Yeah, let's go. We pushed off, gliding down the slope after Ethan. The wind stung my face, and the sound of my skis cutting through the snow filled my ears, but no matter how fast I went, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. By the time we returned to the cabin, the sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow. Ethan burst through the door first, still buzzing with energy. That was incredible. Did you see that jump I hit? Nailed it? Barely, Mason said, tossing his gloves onto the counter. You're lucky you didn't wipe out. Cole laughed softly as he hung his coat by the door. I thought for sure you were going to eat it. I didn't join in the banter. My eyes were drawn to the storage room at the far end of the hall. Something about it felt off, though I couldn't pinpoint why. While the others were unpacking, I slipped inside. The room was small, lined with shelves stocked with firewood, old tools, and miscellaneous supplies. Our ski gear was piled neatly in the corner, exactly where we'd left it. But as I stepped closer, I noticed something strange. The straps on Cole's bag were undone, dangling loosely like someone had been rifling through it. Giz, I called out, my voice tight. Cole appeared in the doorway a moment later. What's up? I gestured to his bag. Did you leave it like this? He frowned, stepping inside to take a closer look. No, I'm pretty sure I fastened it. Mason and Ethan joined us, the air in the room suddenly tense. Maybe it came loose on its own, Ethan offered, though even he didn't sound convinced. Mason knelt down, inspecting the bag with his usual meticulousness. Doesn't look like it. This wasn't an accident. Chew'd Silas have? Cole trailed off, his face pale. Why would he? Mason stood, brushing snow off his pants. He doesn't strike me as the petty thief type, but someone definitely moved it. A heavy silence settled over us, broken only by the faint creak of the cabin settling. Finally, Ethan clapped his hands together, forcing a grin. All right, let's not freak out over nothing. It's probably just one of us forgetting. No big deal. But it was a big deal. We all knew it. Dinner was a quiet affair. Mason cooked while Ethan tried to lighten the mood with jokes that fell flat. Cole barely touched his food, and I couldn't stop glancing toward the hallway, half expecting Silas to appear at any moment. As the fire crackled in the hearth, Mason spoke up. Did anyone notice the footprints outside this morning? What footprints? Ethan asked, his tone wary. Mason set his fork down, his expression serious. When I stepped out to check the weather, I saw tracks leading away from the cabin, but they didn't come back. Maybe it was Silas? Cole suggested. Maybe. Mason didn't sound convinced. But they didn't lead toward his room. They went into the woods. No one had a response to that. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. And for the first time, I felt genuinely trapped. The vast wilderness that had seemed so beautiful earlier now felt like a prison, its silence oppressive. After dinner, as we were cleaning up, Ethan tripped over something in the hallway. Hey, what the? We all turned to see him holding up a small, folded piece of paper. It was yellowed with age, as if it had been tucked away somewhere for a long time. He unfolded it, revealing a single line scrawled in jagged handwriting, "Leave while you can." Cole's breath hitched. Mason grabbed the note, studying it closely. This isn't fresh. The paper's old. Could have been left here years ago. Or it could have been Silas, Ethan said, his voice tight, trying to scare us. I glanced toward the far end of the hall, where the door to Silas's room was closed. The silence from behind it was deafening, like a void that swallowed all sound. We should talk to him. Cole whispered, ask him if he knows anything. No. Mason's tone was firm. Not yet. Let's keep an eye on things and see if it gets worse. Worse than this, Ethan asked, waving the note for emphasis. I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I knew was that the unease that had been gnawing at me since we arrived was no longer just a feeling. It was real, and it was getting harder to ignore. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard faint creaks and groans, like footsteps pacing outside my door. I told myself it was just the wind, the old wood shifting under the weight of the storm, but deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong with this place, and I had a sinking feeling we'd only just scratched the surface. The next morning, I woke to a low grinding sound that seemed to echo through the cabin. For a moment, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was just the wind rattling the wood. But as the sound persisted, metal against metal, deliberate and steady, I knew better. Dragging myself out of bed, I glanced at the clock, 7:02 am. Too early for the sun to provide much warmth, and judging by the frost on the windows, the temperature had dropped further overnight. I quickly pulled on a hoodie and stepped into the hallway. It was quiet now, the kind of silence that wasn't reassuring but oppressive. Mason was already in the main room, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug. He nodded toward the back of the cabin. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, my throat dry. "What was it?" "Not sure," he said. Sounded like it came from Salas's room. Cole joined us a moment later, rubbing his arms for warmth. "Do you think he's working on something? I mean, he is the caretaker, right?" "Maybe," Mason said, though he didn't sound convinced. By the time Ethan finally dragged it himself out of bed, the tension in the cabin had settled into an uneasy rhythm. Mason suggested we spend the day hiking around the nearby trails, a way to keep ourselves occupied and shake off the strange energy that seemed to hang over us. The trails were beautiful, blanketed in fresh snow. The cold air was sharp but invigorating, and for a while, it felt like we'd escaped whatever was happening in the cabin. Ethan was his usual exuberant self, racing ahead and pretending to get lost, while Cole stuck close to Mason, chatting quietly. But even out here, I couldn't relax. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. A branch bending, a shadow shifting. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. Just endless white and the stillness of the trees. At one point, Ethan stopped abruptly, pointing at the ground. "Look." We all gathered around him, staring at the faint impression in the snow. It was a footprint, larger than any of ours and strangely elongated, as if the person, or thing, that left it had been wearing oversized boots. The tracks led deeper into the forest, toward a dense thicket of pines. Cole shivered. "Maybe it's a hunter. In the off-season." Mason replied doubtful. Ethan grinned, though there was an edge to it. "Let's follow it." "No," I said quickly, the word out of my mouth before I could stop myself. "We don't know who, or what, made that." He rolled his eyes. "Come on, Alex, what's the worst that could happen?" "I don't know," I shot back. "And I don't want to find out." Mason stepped between us, his voice calm but firm. "Alex is right. Let's stick to the main trail. We don't want to get lost out here." Ethan muttered something under his breath but didn't argue further. As we continued hiking, the footprint lingered in the back of my mind, an unanswered question that made my skin crawl. By the time we returned to the cabin, the sun was dipping behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the snow. Silas's room door was still closed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching us. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows, felt like a signal. Cole went straight to the kitchen to make tea, while Ethan flopped onto the couch, scrolling through his phone. Mason, ever the investigator, disappeared into the storage room. I followed him, curious. The room was exactly as we'd left it, but Mason was crouched by the far wall, examining something on the floor. "What is it?" I asked, stepping closer. He gestured to a corner where the wood was slightly discolored. "Looks like water damage, but..." He trailed off, pressing his ear to the floor. A moment later, he knocked lightly, and the sound that came back was hollow. I frowned. "There's a space under there, R. Maybe." He straightened up, his brow furrowed. "Could be a crawl space or a storage area. But if that's the case, why wouldn't Silas mention it?" "Because he doesn't want us to know," I said, the words out before I could stop myself. Mason glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "Let's not jump to conclusions, but it's worth keeping in mind." After dinner, Ethan finally had enough of the tension. He slammed his fork onto the table, startling all of us. "Okay, seriously, what's the deal with Silas? The guy barely talks, he's creeping us out, and now we're finding footprints in secret crawl spaces." I say we confront him. "No," Mason said sharply. "Not yet. We don't know enough." "Zen, what do you suggest?" Ethan snapped. "We just sit here and wait for something else weird to happen." "We stay calm," Mason replied. "We keep an eye on things, gather information. If we push him too hard, we could make things worse." "And what if he's dangerous?" Cole whispered. The question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. "We'll handle it," Mason said finally, his voice steady. "Together." But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound, the wind, the creak of the cabin, the faint hum of the heater, felt like a warning. At some point, I heard movement in the hallway, soft and deliberate. I sat up, my heart pounding, and strained to listen. The footsteps stopped outside my door. I held my breath, waiting, but after a few agonizing moments, they moved on. I wanted to believe it was just Silas making his rounds, but the way the steps paused, paced at each door, made my skin crawl. Morning arrived with a pale gray sky that offered no reprieve from the cold. The cabin, though small and cluttered with evidence of its age, had never felt more imposing. Every creak of the wood, every muted whistle of wind through the windows, seemed like a message we weren't equipped to understand. By now, none of us could ignore the growing tension. The strange footprints, the odd noises at night, Silas's looming presence. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle we were too afraid to solve. But Mason was the first to act. "We need to check his room," he announced as we huddled in the kitchen. The coffee pot sputtered weakly, the smell of stale grounds doing little to calm our nerves. "What?" Cole looked up from his mug, his expression a mix of surprise and fear. "His room," Mason repeated. "Silas is hiding something. The guest logs, the way he watches us, the note. It's all too deliberate. We can't just wait for the next thing to happen." Ethan crossed his arms, leaning against the counter. "And what if he catches us? He doesn't seem like the kind of guy who'd just let that slide." Mason shrugged, his tone calm but resolute. "Zen will deal with it. I don't like sneaking around either, but I like being kept in the dark even less." I couldn't disagree. The unease I'd felt since we arrived had grown into something sharper, more urgent. Whatever Silas was up to, it was becoming clear that we weren't safe. "Fine," Ethan said finally. "But if he comes back while we're in there, I'm throwing you under the bus." Silas's room was at the far end of the hallway, the door slightly warped from years of use. For someone who supposedly lived here full time, his presence was strangely invisible. No shoes left out, no jacket hanging in the entryway, no signs that anyone but us had been using the kitchen or bathroom. Mason knelt in front of the door, a thin metal ruler in his hands. He'd found it in the maintenance closet earlier. claiming it could work as a makeshift lockpick. I stood behind him, my breath fogging in the cold air as I kept watch for any sign of Silas. Almost. Got it, Mason muttered, his fingers deftly working the ruler. The lock clicked. My stomach dropped. Mason pushed the door open slowly, the hinges groaning like they were protesting our intrusion. The room was surprisingly sparse. Just a bed with an old quilt, a wooden chair, and a small dresser. There were no personal items, no photographs, no books. It was as if the space had been stripped of any identity. But then we saw the chest. It was tucked beneath the bed, its dark wood almost blending into the shadows. Mason dragged it out, and Ethan knelt beside him, running his hands over the iron latch. Locked, of course, Ethan said. Got any more tricks up your sleeve, Mason? Mason didn't answer. He stood, scanning the room until his eyes landed on a rusty crowbar leaning against the wall near the dresser. This should work. Wait, Cole said, his voice trembling. What if whatever's in there isn't meant for us to see? Mason turned to him, his expression unreadable. That's exactly why we need to see it. The first blow of the crowbar splintered the wood around the latch. The sound echoed in the small room, making me flinch. Mason struck again, and this time the chest popped open with a loud snap. Inside were a few faded papers, a bundle of frayed rope, and an old radio with its wires meticulously cut. But it was the papers that caught my attention. Mason pulled them out, spreading them on the bed. What is this? Ethan asked, leaning over to read. The papers were guest records, much older than the ones we'd found in the maintenance closet. Most of the names were crossed out, with notes scrawled in the margins, canceled. No show, rebooked. But it was the last page that stopped us cold. Our names were listed, along with the date we'd arrived. Next to it, written in the same jagged handwriting as the note we'd found in the hallway, was a single word, stay. What the hell does that mean? Ethan demanded, his voice rising. Mason shook his head. I don't know, but this isn't just a coincidence. He knew we were coming. He planned for us. Cole was pale, his hands gripping the back of the chair. Planned what? To scare us? To hurt us? Maybe both, Mason said grimly. We need to leave? Leave? Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. And how do you suggest we do that? We're snowed in, there's no cell service, and the shuttle isn't coming back for days. We'll figure something out, Mason said. But staying here isn't an option. Before anyone could respond, a loud crash echoed through the cabin. It came from the main room. He's back? Cole gasped, his eyes wide. We scrambled out of Silas's room, leaving the chest and its contents behind. The main room was empty, but the front door was wide open, snow blowing in and dusting the floor. Did he just leave? Ethan whispered. Maybe he heard us, I said. Maybe he knows. Mason said. He grabbed the crowbar, his knuckles white. We'll need to lock this place down. If he comes back. The lights flickered and went out. The sudden darkness was suffocating. Cole fumbled with his phone, turning on the flashlight, the weak beam cutting through the gloom. Stay together, Mason ordered. We'll check the generator. The generator was in a small shed behind the cabin, accessible through a narrow path lined with trees. The snowstorm had eased, but the wind still howled, biting at my face as we trudged outside. The shed door was ajar, the padlock hanging loose. Mason pushed it open cautiously, his flashlight sweeping over the machinery inside. The generator had been deliberately tampered with, wires yanked free, parts scattered across the floor. Looks like he didn't want us to have power. Mason muttered. Why is he doing this? Cole whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. I don't know, Mason said. But whatever his reason, he's escalating. We need to be ready. The rest of the night was a blur of fear and paranoia. Every noise, every shadow felt like a threat. We took turns keeping watch, the crowbar and a kitchen knife our only weapons. But Silas didn't return. By dawn, the storm had cleared, leaving the landscape eerily quiet. Mason worked on the radio, trying to reconnect the wires. Ethan kept an eye on the windows, while Cole sat beside me, his hands trembling. "I don't think I can do this," Cole admitted. I want to go home." "We all do," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Suddenly, Mason cursed under his breath. "Got it." The radio crackled to life, a garbled voice cutting through the static. "Cabin 3 emergency." "This is Cabin 3, Mason said quickly. "We need help. We're snowed in, and someone's trying to." The line went dead. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Ethan said what we were all thinking. He cut the power. What if he's listening to the radio too? Before Mason could answer, a sound came from the hallway, the unmistakable creak of a door opening. Silas was still here, and he wasn't alone. The creak of the door stopped us cold. The cabin, already oppressive in its silence, felt suffocating as the sound echoed down the hallway. We froze, each of us holding our breath as we strained to hear the faintest hint of movement. Then, footsteps. Deliberate, heavy, approaching. Ethan tightened his grip on the crowbar, his knuckles white. Cole backed into the corner of the room, his phone flashlight trembling in his hand. Mason motioned for us to stay quiet, his finger to his lips, but the fear in his eyes was impossible to miss. The footsteps stopped just outside the room where we huddled. For an agonizing moment, nothing happened. No sound, no movement, just the suffocating weight of our own terror. And then, the doorknob turned. "Move, move," Mason hissed, shoving us toward the opposite door that led into the adjacent hallway. We stumbled through just as the main door creaked open behind us. I caught a glimpse of a shadow, a figure stepping into the room, but Mason didn't let me look back. We ran. The hallway felt endless, each step echoing like gunfire against the wood, paneled walls. The faint glow of Cole's flashlight bobbed erratically, casting distorted shadows that made the space feel alive and hostile. Behind us, the sound of footsteps resumed. Faster now, more deliberate. "This way," Ethan barked, leading us into the storage room at the end of the hall. He slammed the door shut and jammed the crowbar against the handle. The footsteps stopped again, just outside. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a low, guttural voice called out, muffled through the door. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was unmistakably Silas's. But there was something different about it now. An edge of fury mixed with desperation. He didn't pound on the door or try to force his way in. He just stood there, the silence more unnerving than any threat. Cole whimpered, his back pressed against the far wall. What does he want? Why won't he just leave us alone? Mason knelt beside the door, his ear pressed against it. "I don't think he's trying to scare us anymore. I think he's trying to keep us here." Ethan frowned. "Why? What's he hiding?" "I don't know," Mason said. "But we're not going to find out by sitting here." The flashlight beam caught something on the floor. A faint seam in the wood, barely noticeable. Mason knelt down, running his fingers along the edge until he found a small groove. It was the crawl space he'd suspected earlier, hidden beneath a loose floorboard. "Help me," he said, gesturing to Ethan. Together, they pried the board free, revealing a dark, narrow space below. The smell of damp earth wafted up, cold and unwelcoming. "You've got to be kidding me," Ethan muttered. "It's our only chance," Mason said. "We don't know how long that door will hold, and we can't wait for him to make the next move." One by one, we lowered ourselves into the crawl space. The air was damp and suffocating, the dirt floor uneven beneath our feet. Cole's flashlight cast long, eerie shadows, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the darkness. Mason led the way, his movements cautious but deliberate. The space was cramped, forcing us to stoop as we moved forward. The sound of our breathing and shuffling echoed unnaturally, making it impossible to tell how far we'd gone. After what felt like an eternity, we reached the end of the crawl space, a narrow wooden panel that seemed to lead outside. Mason pressed against it, and it gave way with a low groan, revealing the snow-covered ground beyond. We scrambled out, the cold air biting at our skin. The cabin loomed behind us, its dark silhouette imposing against the gray sky. But we didn't have time to catch our breath. We had to keep moving. The snow was deep, making it difficult to run. Cole stumbled, and Ethan hauled him to his feet without a word. Mason led the way, his focus on the faint trail that led toward the main road. "Where are we going?" Ethan panted. "Anywhere but here," Mason replied. "We just need to put as much distance as we can between us and the cabin." We hadn't gone far when we heard it, the sound of a snowmobile engine roaring to life. I glanced back and saw him, Silas, perched on the snowmobile, his face a mask of fury. He didn't hesitate. The machine lurched forward, the headlights cutting through the snow as he bore down on us. "Run," Mason shouted. The next moments were a blur of chaos. The snowmobile engine roared behind us, growing louder with each passing second. The cold air burned my lungs, and my legs ached with every step, but I couldn't stop. None of us could. Ethan veered off to the side, grabbing a large branch from the ground. As the snowmobile drew closer, he swung it with all his might, striking the front of the vehicle. The impact sent Silas tumbling into the snow. "Go," Ethan yelled, waving us forward. "I'll hold him off." "No," Cole cried, but Mason grabbed his arm and pulled him along. We didn't look back. By the time we reached the main road, the snowmobile engine had gone silent. I didn't know if Ethan was okay, and we didn't have time to find out. Mason spotted a snowplow in the distance, a faint orange light cutting through the gray. He waved his arms frantically, shouting until the driver spotted us. The plow came to a halt, and an older man leaned out of the cab, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. "What are you kids doing out here?" he asked. "This area is supposed to be closed." "Help us," Mason said, his voice hoarse. "There's someone after us." The driver didn't need convincing. He ushered us into the cab, cranking up the heater as we tried to explain what had happened. He radioed for backup, and within minutes, a second vehicle arrived, this one carrying 2 uniformed officers. The officers listened intently as we recounted the events at the cabin. Their expressions grew darker with every detail. "You said his name was Silas," one of them asked. "Yes," Mason said. "He's the caretaker." The officer exchanged a look with his partner. "That's impossible. Silas was fired months ago. The new caretaker hasn't even started yet." We didn't return to the cabin. The officers assured us they'd investigate, but they advised us to stay in town until the shuttle service resumed. Ethan arrived at the station hours later, battered but alive. He'd managed to knock Silas unconscious long enough to escape. We never learned what happened to Silas. The officers found the cabin empty, the snowmobile abandoned near the woods. The guest logs and papers we'd found were gone, leaving no evidence of the strange, deliberate way our stay had been orchestrated. But I didn't need proof. I knew what we'd experienced was real. As we boarded the shuttle back to civilization, I couldn't help but glance at the mountains one last time. The cabin was hidden somewhere among them, a dark memory I'd never escape. We survived, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Silas hadn't been acting alone, that there was something, or someone, still out there, watching and waiting. Okay, so this is a story I've needed to get off my chest for years. It's been gnawing at me, like a splinter you can't quite dig out. It happened a decade ago, but it feels like yesterday. Honestly, it's so messed up I've never told anyone about it. But here goes. This all went down in a place called the Weeping Woods. Yeah, creepy name, right? It's miles from civilization, totally desolate. Let me back up a bit and explain how I even ended up in that godforsaken place. See, I was in college, studying social sciences with three friends, Liam, Noah, and Maya. We were all obsessed with weird stuff, culture, history, myths, the occult, you name it. We were looking for a research project, something different, something with an edge. It was Liam who suggested the Weeping Woods. He grew up in Pennsylvania, near this creepy forest with a seriously disturbing legend. Maya, our resident folklore nut, was instantly hooked. Road trip, camping, and a research project all rolled into one. Hell yeah, she said. No way anyone else is doing anything this cool. I couldn't argue with that, and Noah, well, he wasn't thrilled about the spooky stuff, but he went along with it. So, we packed up Liam's truck, this beast of a Silverado that could haul anything with tents, food, supplies, and all our recording gear. The drive up to Pennsylvania was actually pretty chill. Liam and I took turns driving, and he filled us in on the legend of the Weeping Woods. Apparently, anyone who went in there came out, well, weeping. No one from his town would go near the place. We brought saws and towing cables just in case the road's blocked. Liam told us that old track leading to the woods is barely used. Noah groaned. Of course, we had to pick the scariest, most backwater place in the world. Maya just laughed. Damn right we did. So, why were people crying? I asked. It had to do with the Woodwick Walker, Liam said. They were forced to leave people behind, but they could never really explain what happened. Some mumbled about a man in the woods, part of the forest itself. Maya was practically bouncing in her seat. Oh, I love this. Tell us more, Liam went on. The one thing everyone agrees on is this: don't look at his face. If you see him, close your eyes. If you can't do that, stare at your feet. Nothing else. Dude, you got really serious just now, Noah said. Liam cleared his throat. Did I? Sorry, I guess it still freaks me out a little. Have you ever actually been to the Weeping Woods? I asked. Just to the edge, Liam admitted. This legend scared the crap out of me as a kid. I grew up in a wooded area, and I'd always imagined seeing him between the trees. I raised an eyebrow. If you're so freaked out, why'd you suggest it for our project? Only way to overcome a fear is to face it, right? He said. Maya nodded. True. I gotta admit, the way Liam talked about it, it started to get to me too. Even Maya was a bit more subdued, and Noah was practically shaking in his boots. But we pressed on. Finally, we reached this tiny town in Pennsylvania. It was so small. I couldn't believe anywhere could be more remote. There was just one diner, and we stopped for breakfast. When we told the waitress where we were going, her face went white. Promise me you'll keep your eyes on the ground in those woods? She pleaded. We laughed it off, but she was dead serious. As we left, Liam said, See, it's a whole thing out here. And you thought this was a good idea? Noah groaned. Relax, guys, Liam said. It's just a legend. Maya, ever the researcher, chimed in. We should come back here after and interview her and any other locals. It'd be great for the project. Hell, we should interview Liam too, I said. He's got plenty to say about it, but Liam just sighed. Yeah. Get in, we're losing daylight. Just how far is this place anyway? 20, maybe 30 miles, Liam said. No one really knows for sure. Now's what? No asked. How far the Weeping Woods actually are, Liam replied. The road there is kind of weird. You'll see. He wasn't kidding. The turn off was this barely visible dirt track, all overgrown and littered with branches. The road itself was a nightmare, twisting and turning with no logic. We felt like we were going in circles. We've turned every which way, but the compass still says northwest, I said, pointing at the dashboard. Liam nodded slowly. The road leads northwest into the Weeping Woods, no matter what. That doesn't make any sense, Maya said. Told you it'd be weird, Liam muttered. He was getting tense. You good, bro? I asked. Yeah, sorry, he sighed. This road just gives me the creeps, that's all. Just then, we rounded a bend and saw it, a massive fallen log blocking the road. Perfect. No, groaned. Liam swore under his breath. I'll take care of it, I said. No worries. Marcus and I will get some pictures and video while you work, Maya said, grabbing her camera. I stepped out of the truck. The first thing that hit me was the silence. It was this deep, heavy quiet, broken only by the wind rustling the leaves. It was weird. I felt like I had to whisper. A thick fog had rolled in, making everything seem even more muffled and eerie. I walked to the back of the truck and Liam joined me. I can handle this myself, you know, I said. He shook his head. Now I'll help. It's all good. Something about the way he said it made me wish he'd stayed in the truck, but we grabbed the saws and headed for the log. It was huge, with branches tangled in the trees at the edge of the road. What do you think? I asked Liam. Cut the branches, then tow the log. He nodded, and we got to work. The sky was getting darker, even though it was barely afternoon. The noise of the saws felt wrong, like we were violating some sacred silence. It's weird how it feels like evening already, I said. Yeah, that happens, Liam replied. Nothing unusual. He stopped mid-sentence. I turned and saw a pale, thin limb disappearing behind a tree. What? Liam asked. I saw something, I stammered, but when I looked again it was gone. Just a twisted tree trunk. I must have been imagining things. You sure? Liam asked, his eyes still fixed on the woods. Yeah, it's nothing. Fog's messing with my mind, I said, trying to laugh it off. We finished cutting the log and towed it out of the way. It's dark, Maya said as we got back in the truck. Too dark, I agreed. The sky looked like night, but it was only 1 p.m. Yeah, this place is weird, I muttered. It's not too late to turn back? No, pleaded. No way, Maya snapped. We've come too far. I got some footage while you guys were sawing, Maya said, lowering her voice. And I talked a little about Liam's behavior too. I glared at her. Really? Of course, she said. His little freak out might be the best part of this project. She wasn't wrong, but it still felt weird to be analyzing our friend behind his back. I don't like it, Noah mumbled. You don't like any of this? Maya retorted. Liam got back in the truck, looking pale. Finally, let's get going. We set off again. The fallen log we'd just moved drifted past my window, and I thought I saw another pale limb vanish behind a tree. I tried to ignore it. The road seemed to narrow, the trees leaning in. We could barely see the sky anymore. With every turn, the fog thickened and the daylight faded. At least the road's clear, I said, trying to sound positive. Liam switched on the headlights. I couldn't see anything beyond the nearest trees, and honestly, I was relieved. There's a little more to the legend, Liam said after a while. We all looked at him. The victims of the walker, he explained. They're said to remain bound to the weeping woods. They're spirits. He glanced at the rearview mirror. Some say they've seen those spirits trying to leave, but they can't. They're trapped. You able to move on? Maya said quietly. Something like that, Liam replied. We didn't talk much after that. The rumble of the truck and the growing darkness were almost hypnotic. Finally, at 2:45 p.m., we reached the end of the road. It opened into a small clearing. Holy crap, there's a car, I exclaimed. Liam looked over. Noah and Maya leaned forward to see. Oh God, Noah whispered. How common is that? Maya asked. Liam cleared his throat. Not very. But there's a legend we're not the only ones who've braved the weeping woods. I peered into the car. It was empty. Probably just someone exploring, like us. Yeah? Liam agreed. So this is it? Maya asked. Yep, Liam said. Past the tree line, that's the weeping woods. Looks the same as the rest of these woods, I pointed out. It's not, Liam insisted. Come on, let's make camp. He jumped out of the truck. No groaned. Let's just get this over with. While the others unloaded the truck, I walked over to the abandoned car. It was old, rusted, and covered in grime. I couldn't see inside. I rubbed some of the dirt off a window and peered in. Nothing unusual. Just some junk, a travel mug, a tote bag. But then I saw a slip of paper on the dashboard. I walked around to get a better look. I spat on the windshield and wiped it clean. The paper had something written on it in big bold letters. Gna lo kai I have to tl aloneatnight tseos. I backed away from the car. A gust of wind swept through the clearing, making the trees hiss. Guz, I called. They came over. What is it? Maya asked. Read this, I said, pointing to the note. They each took a turn reading it. Oh God, Noah whispered. Have people been known to come here to, commit suicide? Maya asked Liam. Like that forest in Japan? Liam shook his head. Not that I know of. This person seriously did not come back. Noah said, his voice trembling. He could have gotten lost, I offered. We all looked at Liam. He just shrugged. At what point do we concede that this forest is actually dangerous? Noah asked. You're an academic, Noah, Maya said. Do you really believe in the Woodwick Walker? I'm not saying that, he retorted. But legends come from somewhere, don't they? In this case, I'd say it's to justify the dangers of this cursed place. Maya scowled. How are you feeling about all this? I looked at her, then at Noah. More curious than scared at this point. Sorry, Noah, Maya said, turning to Liam. And you good with this? I want to see this through, Liam said, his voice firm. He looked back at Noah. Well, Noah groaned for what felt like the 100th time that day. All right, whatever. Let's go. We shouldered our backpacks and followed Liam into the weeping woods. I don't know what I expected when we crossed the tree line. Maybe some sudden chill, a shift in the air, something to announce that we were in the weeping woods. But it was just trees. More of the same creepy, silent trees. We hiked for about half an hour, Liam marking trees as we went so we could find our way back. How far are we going? Noah asked, sounding anxious. However far we want, I guess, Liam replied. There's nowhere specific to go. Yeah, once you're in, Maya agreed. We drove all this way, might as well make it count. No, Noah said, dropping his bags. We're stopping here. Is this spot okay? I asked Liam. Good as any? He shrugged. Fine by me, I said. Let's set up camp. It was getting pretty dark, so we had to use our flashlights. I pitched the tents, Liam gathered firewood, Noah started on dinner, and Maya set up the recording equipment. We didn't talk much. I think we were all feeling the weight of the day, the weirdness of the place. We just wanted to get settled. Liam managed to get a fire going. despite the damp wood. We set up our chairs around the fire pit, and Maya positioned the cameras and microphones like some kind of creepy audience. I checked my phone. It was 4:42 p.m. I looked up and saw a faint gray light filtering through the leaves. A breeze rustled past, carrying fallen leaves. "You have any bars?" Noah asked. I checked my phone again. Nope. Lost them all back on that road. "Told you it was weird," Liam mumbled. We talked for a bit longer, keeping our voices low. Every now and then, one of us would glance over our shoulder into the deepening darkness. It was like the shadows were alive, pressing in on our little circle of light. By the time we ate dinner, it was pitch black beyond the firelight. The wind had died down, but every now and then, it would sigh through the trees, sending a shiver down my spine. "That was delicious," Maya said, finishing her stew. "Thanks, no. No problem," he replied. "It's too dark to film anything," Maya said. "I'm too early to sleep. How about some ghost stories?" I laughed. "Hell yeah!" Even Noah cracked a smile. We sat around the fire swapping cheesy stories. Surprisingly, the creepiest one came from Noah, a tale about the haunting of Little Landry. But that's a story for another time. After a couple of hours, we decided to turn in. We were exhausted, and we needed to be up early to explore. We doused the fire and crawled into our tents. Lying in my sleeping bag, I was surrounded by absolute darkness. I couldn't see a thing, not even my hand in front of my face. The only sounds were the occasional rustle from the other tents and the sighing wind. As creepy as it was, there was something comforting about being bundled up in my sleeping bag, surrounded by nature. I drifted off to sleep, but my sleep was restless, filled with nightmares I couldn't quite remember. Then I woke up to the sound of creaking wood. It was a slow, drawn-out creaking, like something heavy was moving through the trees. It seemed to be coming from all directions. I sat up, heart pounding. Was it just the wind, or was it something else? I thought about calling out to my friends, but I was too scared. Images flashed through my mind, grotesque shapes moving in the darkness. Then I heard Lime's voice, a terrified whisper. "He's here. Stay in your tents. Don't look at him." A chill ran down my spine. I squeezed my eyes shut. The creaking got closer. I heard someone moving in one of the other tents. Who the hell was making noise? Didn't they know? The whispering and the creaking got louder, almost like words. Then, a blinding light flashed on. I opened my eyes and saw Liam standing outside, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Liam," I gasped. "What are you doing?" "Quiet," he hissed. "Close your eyes and be quiet." "I'm fine." But his voice sounded anything but fine. I closed my eyes again, my heart pounding. The creaking was right outside my tent now. I could hear Liam's ragged breathing, the hint of a whimper. I almost started praying, but then the creaking stopped. Just like that, it was gone. A breeze swept through the campsite, and the oppressive presence vanished. I opened my eyes and saw Liam's flashlight lying on the ground. But Liam was gone. I scrambled out of my tent. "Liam," I shouted. Maya was emerging from her tent, her eyes wide. "He's gone," she whispered. Noah poked his head out, his face pale. "Liam," he called. "He's gone," I yelled. I picked up Liam's flashlight and swung it around, but there was nothing. Just trees and darkness. I pointed the light at the ground where he had been standing. There was a clear impression in the mulch, but no footprints leading away. Maya started laughing. "Oh, this is great. This is absolutely fantastic." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" "It's a prank, of course," she said. "Liam's got us good." I tried to think. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was just a really elaborate prank. "Are you kidding me?" Noah whispered. "You both heard the wood, didn't you?" Yeah, but we're in a forest, I said. A creepy forest. Exactly, Maya agreed. Liam's just pulling the prank of the century. He's probably got the whole thing on camera. We'll never live this down, I said, trying to laugh. We'll look at the footage. That'll settle your nerves, right? No. He nodded. Let's see. Maya grabbed the camera that was pointed at our camp. I built up the fire again while she reviewed the footage. I checked my phone. It was 23:15 am. Ah! Maya exclaimed. Told you so. She crouched between Noah and me and hit play. We saw a grainy image of our tents, lit by Liam's flashlight. He was looking around, and for a moment, I thought I saw something in the background, but the image was too blurry. Is there audio? I asked. Should be, Maya said. Then why isn't there any sound? She shrugged. Must have been imagining things. Liam froze, his flashlight pointed into the darkness. Maybe he saw something off camera, or maybe he was just messing with us. He set the flashlight down and walked in the direction he was looking. We could hear the crunch of leaves under his feet. See, Maya said, pausing the video. That bastard pranked the hell out of us. She stood up. Liam, come out already. The prank's over, you win. But there was no response. She called out a few more times, and I even joined in, but Liam didn't answer. You still think this is a prank? Noah asked, his voice trembling. I looked at him unsure. Wes, Maya said firmly. No frowned. Then where the hell is he? Maya looked away. I sighed. Look, whatever this is, we have to find him. We can't risk him getting lost or hurt out there. Noah groaned and buried his face in his hands. That's fair, Maya said. It's freezing. Let's bundle up, grab some lights, and head out. I'll keep the camera rolling. I'll grab a knife, Noah said. Maya and I exchanged uneasy glances. To mark the trees, he explained, rolling his eyes. So we can find our way back. Ah, smart, I said. A few minutes later, we set out into the forest, following the direction Liam's flashlight had been pointing. We called his name, but our voices grew less confident with each repetition. The darkness seemed to swallow the light from our flashlights, making it hard to see. Liam, Liam, Jack, Liam. No, cursed. I've marked 15 trees. We should turn back. Okay, I sighed. We'll head back and try a different direction. As we turned, there was a sharp crack. Maya screamed. What is it? I asked, rushing to her side. She was staring at the ground, one hand clutched to her chest. Oh God. What? No, and I leaned closer. There in Maya's footprint was a bone. A broken old bone. It's human, she whispered. What? I said, shocked. How do you know? Because I studied this in a recent course. She hissed. That is without a doubt a human femur. I grimaced and brushed away the mulch with my boot, revealing more of the skeleton. You don't think it. No trailed off, his eyes wide with fear. You mean? I looked at the skeleton. No, definitely not. These bones are old. Maybe it's the guy from the car, Maya suggested. Maybe, I murmured, uncovering more of the corpse. Soon, we were looking at a full human skeleton. The arms were folded over the rib cage, and clutched in the skeletal hands was a bundle of sticks. Jesus Christ, Maya muttered, still filming. Let's get back to camp. A sense of dread washed over me. We hurried back, Noah leading the way, following his markings on the trees. Maya was unusually quiet, her face pale. Back at camp, Noah immediately started gathering wood for a new fire. Maya paced back and forth, while I fidgeted, unable to relax. We'll need to head out again, I said. Liam's still out there. Where would we even look? Maya asked. Don't know, anywhere. I shone my flashlight in the opposite direction from where Liam had disappeared. Then I gasped. I saw a pair of legs sticking out from behind a tree. Lamb's legs. My heart leaped. I ran towards him, calling his name. I rounded the tree and there he was, alive, seemingly unharmed. Liam, I cried, kneeling beside him. But he didn't respond. He just stared blankly upwards, his arms folded across his chest, his hands clutching a bundle of sticks. Liam, Maya called. Are you all right? What's wrong with him? Noah whispered. Liam didn't move, didn't even blink. This must be part of the prank, Maya muttered. I glared at her. Weren't you worried just now? She looked confused. None of us were thinking straight. We have to get out of here, Noah said, his voice shaking. But the project, Maya started. Look, I said, we'll come back for the equipment. Maybe we'll even continue with the project. But right now, we need to get Liam some help. He's not okay. How do we get him back to the truck? Noah asked. Liam was a big guy. There was no way we could carry him. We'll take an arm each and drag him, I said. Maya, you guide us. Take Liam's flashlight, the brightest one, and look for his markings. Maya, for once, did as she was told. She even set down the camera. We set off, Noah and I groaning as we pulled Liam through the undergrowth. We were facing away from Maya, so we had to rely on her to guide us. The darkness felt heavier now, like it was closing in. Then, Noah yelled. I looked over and saw a tall, thin figure with pale skin and unnaturally long limbs. It was standing just beyond the reach of our lights, its twisted mouth open in a silent scream. It raised a long, bony arm towards us. Noah and I screamed and started running, dragging Liam with us. What happened? Maya gasped, shining the flashlight in our faces. There's something out there. Noah shrieked. Run! Was it the Woodwick Walker? I didn't know, but the fact that we had both looked at it and were still alive suggested maybe not. We scrambled through the woods, expecting to see the creature at any moment. Suddenly, the wind stopped. The rustling leaves, the creaking branches, all fell silent. We froze. I felt a chill run down my spine. Noah and I exchanged terrified glances. Then we heard it, the creaking wood. Don't look at him, I hissed. Noah squeezed his eyes shut. I looked down at Liam. He was still staring blankly upwards. I clapped my hands over his eyes, then closed my own. The whispering and the creaking grew louder. I strained to understand the words, but I couldn't. Then Maya spoke. Oh, this is ridiculous. I'm not playing this stupid game anymore. Maya, quiet, I whispered. She laughed. Look at you two, with your eyes closed, you're grown men. Give me a break. There's nothing. She stopped abruptly. Her breathing quickened. I heard a thud. She had dropped the flashlight. Then, silence. I opened my eyes. Maya was gone. She's gone. Noah whispered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, my throat tight. She's gone. We stood there for a moment, the silence pressing in on us. The darkness seemed to have deepened, the trees looming over us like silent predators. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. We had lost Liam, and now Maya. We were alone in this godforsaken forest, with something terrifying lurking in the shadows. We have to get out of here, Noah said, his voice shaking. No. I nodded, my mind racing. We had to get back to the truck, but how? We were miles from the clearing, and the forest was a maze in the darkness. We couldn't even see the markings Liam had made on the trees. We need a light, I said, my voice hoarse. Liam's flashlight is gone. Noah fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a small penlight. It was barely stronger than a firefly, but it was better than nothing. We started walking, Noah leading the way, his light casting a feeble glow on the path ahead. We stumbled through the undergrowth, our hearts pounding in our chests. Every creak and groan of the trees sent shivers down our spines. We kept expecting to see that creature again, its pale limbs reaching for us. its twisted face contorted in a silent scream. But the forest remained silent, except for the sound of our own ragged breathing and the crunch of leaves under our feet. The silence was almost worse than the creature. It was a heavy, oppressive silence, filled with unseen dangers. After what felt like hours, we saw a faint glow in the distance. We quickened our pace, our hopes rising. As we got closer, we realized it was the clearing, and the headlights of Liam's truck were shining like beacons in the darkness. We burst out of the trees, gasping for breath. We had made it. We were safe. But the relief was short-lived. As we approached the truck, we saw Liam and Maya lying in the back. Their eyes blank, their bodies still. They were clutching bundles of sticks to their chests. No. No whispered, his voice breaking. I felt a surge of anger. Damn it, Liam, what have you done? We climbed into the truck, No taking the driver's seat. I sat beside him, my mind numb. We had to get out of there, get Liam and Maya to a hospital. But as Noah turned the key in the ignition, the engine sputtered and died. He tried again, but nothing. The engine wouldn't start. What the hell? Noah muttered, hitting the dashboard in frustration. I felt a cold dread creeping up my spine. We were stranded. We got out of the truck and checked under the hood. But neither of us knew anything about cars. We were helpless. As we stood there, the first rays of dawn began to filter through the trees. The forest was still dark, but the shadows were less menacing now. We could see the outlines of the trees, the twisted branches reaching up like skeletal fingers. Then we heard it. The creaking. It was closer this time, louder. It seemed to be coming from all around us. Don't look, I whispered, my voice trembling. Noah nodded, his eyes wide with fear. We stood there, frozen, as the creaking grew louder. We could hear the whispering now, the guttural sounds that seemed to slither into our minds. I squeezed my eyes shut, but I could still see the creature in my mind's eye. It was tall and thin, with pale, almost translucent skin. Its limbs were long and slender, ending in sharp claws. Its face was a grotesque mask of pain, its mouth twisted into a silent scream. The creaking stopped. We held our breath, listening. Then, a voice, a raspy, whispering voice that seemed to come from the very air around us. You look, I opened my eyes. The creature was standing in front of us, its pale face inches from mine. Its eyes were black pits, devoid of any light or emotion. I screamed and stumbled back, tripping over a tree root. I fell to the ground, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature leaned over me, its face contorted in a horrifying grin. Its breath was cold and fetid, like the smell of decay. You looked, it whispered again, its voice a chilling rasp. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But it never came. I opened my eyes cautiously. The creature was gone. I scrambled to my feet, my legs shaking. Noah was standing beside me, his face pale. It's gone, he whispered. We looked around, but there was no sign of the creature. The forest was silent again, the only sound the gentle rustling of leaves in the morning breeze. We ran to the truck and piled in. This time, the engine started without a hitch. We sped away from the clearing, not stopping until we reached the highway. We never looked back. We never spoke about what happened in the Weeping Woods. We just tried to forget. But we couldn't. The nightmares continued. The creaking wood, the whispering voices, the pale, a faceless creature. It haunted our dreams, a constant reminder of the horror we had witnessed. Liam and Maya remained in a catatonic state, their minds trapped in the Weeping Woods. Noah and I tried to move on, but the experience had changed us. We were no longer the carefree students we had been before. We were haunted, broken, and we knew that the Weeping Woods would never let us go. The hospital was a blur. Doctors, nurses, tests, scans, the works. Nothing made sense. Liam and Maya were unresponsive, their eyes blank, their bodies still. The doctors called it catatonia, said they might snap out of it, might not. It was like they were trapped somewhere, their minds lost in the woods. No, and I were in shock. We barely spoke. We just went through the motions, answering questions, signing forms, trying to make sense of the senseless. Eventually, we were allowed to see Lime and Maya. They were lying in hospital beds, hooked up to machines, their faces pale and drawn. I held Lime's hand, hoping he could feel my presence, hoping he could hear me. "Liam, it's me," I whispered. "Please come back to us." But there was no response, just the steady beep of the heart monitor and the hiss of the ventilator. We left the hospital, feeling numb and defeated. We drove back to our town in silence, the weight of what we had experienced pressing down on us. The next few days were a blur. We went to classes, tried to focus on our studies, but it was impossible. The weeping woods haunted our every waking moment. We saw pale limbs in the shadows, heard creaking wood in the wind. We jumped at every sudden noise, our hearts pounding in our chests. We tried to talk about it, but the words wouldn't come. How could we explain the unexplainable? How could we describe the horror we had witnessed? We drifted apart, each of us lost in our own private hell. No dropped out of college and moved back home. I finished my degree, but my heart wasn't in it. I lost my passion for social sciences, for learning, for life itself. I got a job, a mindless, soul-crushing job that paid the bills. I moved to a town far away from any forests, a town where the only trees were the neatly trimmed ones lining the streets. I even cut down all the bushes in my yard, just to be safe. But the weeping woods still haunted me. I saw pale limbs in the shadows of my apartment, heard creaking wood in the silence of the night. I couldn't escape the memories, the fear, the guilt. Why had I survived? Why had Liam and Maya been taken? What had we done to deserve such a fate? The questions tortured me day and night. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. I was a shell of my former self, a ghost haunting my own life. One day, I decided to visit Liam and Maya. They were still in the special care facility, their condition unchanged. They lay in their beds, their eyes blank, their bodies still. They were like living statues, frozen in time. I sat beside Liam's bed, holding his hand. I told him about my life, about my struggles, about my guilt. I told him how sorry I was, how I wished I could have done things differently. But there was no response. Just the steady beep of the heart monitor and the hiss of the ventilator. I left the facility, feeling more hopeless than ever. I walked aimlessly through the streets, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. As I passed a park, I saw a group of children playing on the swings. They were laughing and shouting, their faces filled with joy. I watched them for a while, a pang of longing in my heart. I remembered a time when I was carefree and happy, a time before the weeping woods, a time when I believed in the goodness of the world. But that time was gone, lost forever in the darkness of the forest. I continued walking, my head bowed, my shoulders slumped. I felt a deep sense of despair, a feeling that I would never be happy again. Then I heard a voice. "Excuse me?" I looked up. A young woman was standing in front of me, a concerned expression on her face. "Are you all right?" she asked. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "You seem lost," she said gently. I nodded, unable to speak. "Can I help you?" she asked. I looked at her, my eyes filled with tears. "I don't know," I whispered. She smiled kindly. "It's okay," she said. "Sometimes we all need a little help." She took my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "Come with me," she said. Let's find somewhere to talk. I followed her, my heart filled with a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to heal, to find peace after the weeping woods. Maybe, with help, I could finally escape the darkness and find my way back to the light. It's been years since that night in the weeping woods. Years of therapy, medication, and countless sleepless nights. The nightmares have faded, but the memories remain, sharp and clear as ever. Liam and Maya are still in that facility. I visit them every now and then, hoping for a miracle, but they remain unchanged, lost in their own silent worlds, clutching their bundles of sticks. No, and I reconnected a few years ago. It was awkward at first, the unspoken trauma hanging heavy between us. But we talked, slowly and carefully, sharing our experiences, our fears, our guilt. It helped knowing we weren't alone. We both still struggle with what happened. The fear of the dark, the aversion to forests, the constant vigilance for anything out of the ordinary. But we're coping, finding ways to live with the scars. I still think about that night often. I think about the choices we made, the things we could have done differently. I think about Liam, Maya, and Tina, their lives forever altered by that cursed place. But I also think about the kindness of strangers, the hope that flickered in the darkness. I think about the young woman in the park, her gentle smile, her offer of help, and I realize that even in the face of unimaginable horror, there is still light to be found. There is still hope for healing, for finding peace, for living a life worth living. The weeping woods may have taken a part of me, but it didn't take all of me. I'm still here, still fighting, still searching for my way back to the light. And I know, deep down, that I will find it. The snow crunched under my boots as I hopped off the snowmobile. The engine idled, a low rumble in the frozen silence. The driver, a weathered guy named Hank, nodded towards the fire tower looming in the distance. "You'll be all right," he muttered, his voice muffled by the thick scarf wrapped around his face. "Just remember the rules. Ronnie's always on the radio if you need anything." I nodded back, even though my chest was tight with a nervous feeling I couldn't quite shake. This wasn't just a job for me. It was an escape. The cold, desolate Alaskan wilderness was the perfect place to disappear for a while, to put some serious distance between me and the life I'd left behind. The kind of distance that felt safe, necessary. The fire tower stood alone in the clearing, an 80-foot sentinel against the sea of pine trees that stretched endlessly in every direction. It looked older than I expected, its wooden frame weathered and creaking in the stiff wind. A set of rickety stairs spiraled to the top, where a small cabin perched like a bird's nest. I swallowed hard, adjusted my backpack, and started trudging towards it. Hank called after me, his voice sharp despite the wind. "One last thing. Don't mess with that floodlight unless you absolutely have to." I frowned, turning back. "Why not?" He shrugged like it wasn't even worth explaining. "You'll know if you need it." Then he revved the engine and sped off, leaving a plume of snow in his wake. I was alone. Inside the tower, the air was stale and faintly metallic, a smell that clung to the walls like the ghost of a long, forgotten fire. The cabin was small but functional, a bunk with a thin mattress, a wood stove, a desk cluttered with outdated maps, and a single radio sitting on top of a stack of manuals. The radio crackled to life just as I dropped my gear. "Is this the new guy?" The voice was rough but warm, like gravel wrapped in a blanket. I pressed the button on the side of the handset. "Yeah, just got here. You must be Ronnie, ah." "That's right. Welcome to paradise," he said with a dry chuckle. "First things first, settle in, but read that manual. Follow the rules, and you'll be fine." Anything specific I should know? There was a pause, static hissing faintly in the background. A few things. Don't leave the tower after dark, no matter what you hear. Don't shine that floodlight unless it's a real emergency. And if the radio goes dead, stay put until morning. His tone made it clear he wasn't kidding around. Got it? I nodded to myself. The line went quiet, and I placed the handset back on its cradle. My eyes wandered to the desk where a thick, dog-eared manual sat beneath a stack of papers. On top of the pile was a leather-bound journal. Curious, I flipped it open to the first page. The handwriting was scrawled and uneven, as if the writer had been in a rush or under duress. March 3rd, first day at the tower. Quiet so far, too quiet. The forest stretches on forever, a sea of black pines against the snow. It feels alive, somehow, like it's watching me. I'm probably just tired or imagining things. The entry ended abruptly, and I flipped forward, skimming through pages filled with fragmented thoughts. As I read, a pattern emerged. The writer, a guy named Caleb, had worked in the tower years ago. His early entries were mundane observations about the weather and the monotony of the job. But as I reached the later pages, his tone changed. March 12th. The wind doesn't sound right. It's not just wind. It's voices. I tried the floodlight, but it didn't help. Just made things worse. I snapped the journal shut, a shiver crawling up my spine. My gaze drifted to the window, where the snow swirled in the fading light. The forest was dark now, its shadows stretching like fingers toward the base of the tower. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the uneasy feeling that had crept in. It was just a story, a guy stuck in isolation, letting his mind get the better of him. Right? That night, the wind howled around the tower, shaking the walls and groaning through the beams. I lay on the bunk, staring at the ceiling, the journal's words circling in my mind. Somewhere outside, a faint knocking sound broke through the noise. I sat up, my breath caught in my throat. It was rhythmic, deliberate, not the random creaks of the structure settling in the cold. I grabbed the flashlight from the desk and approached the window, my heart hammering. The forest was still, blanketed in snow, but the sound continued. Knock, knock, knock. It was coming from the supports beneath the tower. Just the wind. I whispered to myself, though the words rang hollow. I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. The knocking stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. I stood there for a long moment, straining to hear anything else, but the only sound was the faint hiss of the wind. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I forced myself to shake off the uneasy feeling and focus on the job. Through the binoculars, I scanned the horizon, looking for smoke or any signs of trouble. The landscape was pristine, a frozen expanse of white and green that seemed endless. By noon, the radio crackled again. "How's it going up there?" Ronnie's voice broke the silence. "Quiet," I replied. "No smoke, no issues." "That's good. Keep your eyes open. This time of year things can change fast." Before I could respond, the radio emitted a strange burst of static, followed by a faint voice, too faint to make out the words. I adjusted the dial, but the line went dead. "Ronnie," I said into the handset. No response. Just static. I set it down, frowning. Maybe the storm the night before had messed with the signal. Or maybe it was just old equipment. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I glanced at the journal on the desk, its leather cover almost daring me to open it again, but I resisted. Instead, I picked up the binoculars and resumed my watch. That's when I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the forest. It was distant, little more than a shadow among the trees, but it was unmistakably human. My pulse quickened as I adjusted the focus. trying to get a clearer view. The figure didn't move. It just stood there watching. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. I lowered the binoculars, my hands trembling. My mind raced with questions. Who was that? What was that? And why had they been standing there, so close to the tower? I didn't have answers, but as the daylight faded and the shadows stretched longer, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't as alone as I thought. That night, the knocking returned. Louder this time and more insistent. Knock. Knock, knock. It came from the same spot beneath the tower, but now it was joined by something else, a faint scraping sound, like nails dragging against wood. I gripped the flashlight, my knuckles white, and peered out the window. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty forest below. But the sounds didn't stop. Knock, knock. Scrape. I backed away from the window, my heart racing. The radio was dead again, and Hank's warning echoed in my mind, "Don't mess with that floodlight unless you absolutely have to." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the switch. Was this an emergency? Did I need it? The knocking grew louder, more frantic. With a deep breath, I flipped the switch. The floodlight roared to life, bathing the clearing in a harsh, white glow. For a moment, the forest seemed to recoil, its shadows retreating like living things. And then I saw it. Standing just beyond the edge of the light was the figure from before. It was closer now, its features still obscured, but its presence undeniable. It didn't move, it just stared. The floodlight flickered, and my blood ran cold. When it steadied, the figure was gone. I turned off the light and locked the door, my hands trembling. Sleep was out of the question. All I could do was wait for dawn and hope I'd make it through the night. As the first light of morning crept over the horizon, I sat slumped in the chair by the desk, exhausted but alive. The journal stared back at me, its leather cover gleaming faintly in the pale light. I opened it again, flipping to a page I hadn't read before. The words seemed to leap off the page, scrawled in frantic, uneven strokes. If you see it, don't look away. If it knocks, don't answer. It wants you to break the rules. I closed the journal with a snap, my heart pounding. Whatever I'd signed up for, it was far more than just a job, and it wasn't going to let me leave. The snow around the fire tower sparkled under the weak morning sun, a deceptively calm scene that felt worlds away from the night's events. My body ached from the tension of staying awake, and my mind raced, filled with unanswered questions. I couldn't stop thinking about the figure I'd seen, the way it stood at the edge of the light, unmoving yet undeniably aware of me. I busied myself with routine tasks to push the memory aside. I scanned the forest with the binoculars, panning slowly across the endless sea of pines. Nothing unusual, no smoke, no movement, but the eerie stillness felt like a warning. The radio crackled suddenly, and I jumped. "Morning." Ronnie's voice greeted me, calm and familiar. "Morning," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. "Everything's quiet. No smoke." "That's good," Ronnie said. Then he hesitated. "How was last night?" I paused, debating whether to tell him about the knocking, the scraping, the figure, but I remembered his earlier instructions: follow the rules, and you'll be fine. It felt like asking too many questions might break some unwritten rule. "It was fine," I lied. Ronnie didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was clipped. "Good. Keep your head on straight out there. This job has a way of messing with people." The line went dead before I could reply. By mid-afternoon, a faint column of smoke appeared on the horizon, a dark thread against the pale blue sky. My heart sank. It wasn't supposed to happen this early in the season. I grabbed the radio and pressed the button. "Ronnie, do you copy? There's smoke southeast of my position." maybe 5 miles out. Static hiss, followed by a faint, fragmented sound that didn't resemble Ronnie's voice. I adjusted the dial, but the line stayed dead. "Ronnie, are you there?" Nothing. I stared at the smoke, unsure of what to do. The manual was clear about staying close to the tower, but this situation didn't feel like something I could just ignore. If there was a fire, it could spread quickly, and I couldn't count on Ronnie to help. Grabbing my backpack, I stuffed it with essentials: water, a flashlight, a flare gun. I slipped the journal into a side pocket, almost as an afterthought. The thick leather made me feel slightly more grounded, as absurd as that seemed. Finally, I grabbed the rifle mounted on the wall. It was old and heavy, but the ammunition was intact. I didn't know what I was expecting to encounter, but after last night, I wasn't taking any chances. I descended the tower, the stairs creaking under my boots, and set off toward the smoke. The forest was silent as I moved through it, the snow crunching softly beneath my feet. The air was sharp and cold, biting at my face and filling my lungs with every breath. As I walked, the smoke grew closer, thicker, until the acrid smell of burning wood reached my nose. I found the source about an hour later, a campsite, or rather, what was left of one. The fire had been small and contained, but it had burned down to ashes. Around it, there were signs of a hasty departure: an overturned kettle, a torn sleeping bag, a scattering of belongings half buried in the snow. I crouched down, inspecting the scene. Something felt off. There were no footprints leading away from the site, no signs of anyone leaving, just the eerie suggestion that whoever had been here had vanished into thin air. Among the scattered items, something caught my eye, a blood-stained map. The paper was yellowed and brittle, as though it had been exposed to the elements for far too long. An X was scrawled on it in red ink, marking a spot deeper in the forest. My fingers hesitated before picking it up. The sight of the blood made my stomach churn, but my curiosity outweighed my fear. I folded the map carefully and slid it into my pocket. The wind picked up suddenly, carrying a faint, hollow sound that I couldn't quite place. A chill ran down my spine. I stood, scanning the trees, but there was nothing, just the endless pines swaying gently in the breeze. I decided to head back to the tower. Whatever I'd stumbled upon, it wasn't something I wanted to deal with out here. The feeling of being watched clung to me all the way back. Night fell quickly, as it always did in the wilderness, and I returned to the relative safety of the tower. I locked the hatch behind me and double-checked the floodlight switches, making sure everything was in order. The rifle was propped against the wall beside the desk, within easy reach. As I sat down, the journal called to me, its leather cover glinting faintly in the lamplight. I flipped to a random page, my heart heavy with apprehension. March 15th. I saw it again, just standing there watching. I think wants me to leave, but it doesn't seem angry. Not yet. If I break the rules, though, I don't think it will let me go. The words sent a shiver through me. Was Caleb writing about the same figure I'd seen? The same one that had been just beyond the floodlight's reach? A loud knock jolted me from my thoughts. Knock. Knock. It was louder than before, echoing through the structure with a deliberate rhythm. My breath caught in my throat as I reached for the flashlight. This time, the sound wasn't coming from beneath the tower. It was coming from the stairs. I stood, every muscle in my body tensed, and moved toward the window. The flashlight's beam swept over the steps, illuminating nothing but the empty wood. The knocking stopped abruptly. Then, faintly, I heard it, a low scraping sound, like nails dragging along the outer wall of the cabin. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering in my ears. I turned toward the floodlight switch, but a sudden surge of static from the radio made me freeze. The noise was sharp, grating, and it quickly gave way to something worse, a voice. It wasn't Ronnie's voice. It was distorted, guttural, and wrong. "You're not alone." The words were faint but unmistakable. My hand hovered over the radio, unsure whether to respond. The static returned, louder now, until the speaker emitted a sharp crack and went silent. I stared at the radio, my mind racing. The knock, the scrape, the voice. It was all connected somehow, but I didn't know how to make sense of it. A sudden thud against the wall snapped me out of my thoughts. This wasn't random. It was testing me, trying to make me break the rules. I had to hold firm. I turned off the lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness. The only light came from the moon, casting pale beams through the windows. I sat in the corner, clutching the rifle, and waited. The knocking didn't come again that night, but the silence that replaced it felt worse. The next morning, I unfolded the blood-stained map on the desk. The X stared back at me, as if daring me to find it. I didn't know why Caleb's journal hadn't mentioned a map or a campsite, but the connection felt undeniable. I grabbed the journal again, flipping through the pages in search of answers. One line stood out, written in shaky handwriting near the end. March 18th. It's drawing me closer. I think it wants me to find something. Or maybe it's leading me to my end. My hand trembled as I set the journal down. The X loomed large in my mind, a mystery I couldn't ignore. But the rules were clear: stay in the tower after dark. And yet, part of me wondered if that was exactly what Kit wanted. The journal's leather cover felt heavier in my hands as I opened it again, the faint smell of aged paper mingling with the cold air in the cabin. My eyes scanned the jagged handwriting of Caleb, the previous fire watcher. It was the only thing tethering me to some semblance of understanding, or at least, I hoped it would be. March 20th. I know it's watching me. Every time I turn away, I can feel it there, waiting. It doesn't just want me gone. It wants me to see something. But I don't know if I'm strong enough to look. The words sank in, gnawing at my thoughts. Caleb had walked these same steps, climbed these stairs, and stared out into the same forest. And yet, he hadn't made it out. What was it that he couldn't face? I flipped ahead, the pages filled with hurried, fragmented entries, each one more erratic than the last. March 27th. It's not the forest that's alive, it's the space between the trees. It moves when I blink, when I sleep, when I think I'm safe. March 23rd. The knocking isn't random. It's a language. I tried to knock back, and now it's louder, closer. Don't answer. Don't respond. Don't look. I shut the journal abruptly, my pulse quickening. A deep unease settled over me, like the weight of the air had shifted. Outside, the snow fell softly, coating the forest in a deceptive stillness. But Caleb's words lingered, sharp and insistent. It's a language. The day passed in a haze of paranoia. Every sound outside the tower felt amplified. The groan of the wind, the creak of the wood, the distant snap of a branch. I busied myself scanning the horizon, looking for any sign of movement, but the binoculars revealed only an endless expanse of white and green. By late afternoon, the radio crackled to life. "Ronnie." I grabbed the handset, my voice shaky with relief. His tone was clipped. "You've been quiet." "I saw smoke yesterday," I said, hesitating. "And I found something, a campsite, but no footprints. And this." I unfolded the blood-stained map, as if he could see it through the static. "There's a marked spot deeper in the forest." Ronnie was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. "Don't go near it." "Why not?" I demanded. "What is it?" "You're there to watch, not to wander." Stay in the tower, keep your eyes open, and follow the rules. That's how you make it through." The line went dead before I could argue. My frustration boiled over, and I slammed the handset onto the desk. Ronnie's cryptic warnings weren't enough anymore. I needed answers. That night, the knocking returned. It started faintly, a soft rhythm on the stairs. Knock. Knock. Each impact reverberated through the wooden frame of the tower, deliberate and insistent. My heart pounded as I reached for the flashlight. The beam sliced through the darkness. Nothing. The sound grew louder, more forceful. Knock. Knock. This time, it wasn't just on the stairs, it was on the walls, the windows, the very structure of the cabin. It was everywhere, surrounding me. I backed into the corner, gripping the rifle tightly, and shouted into the empty air, "What do you want?" The knocking stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence that pressed against my ears. I strained to hear anything, any movement, any whisper, but the only sound was my own ragged breathing. And then, faintly, a new sound emerged, a low, guttural hum, like a chant carried on the wind. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the radio. I stared at the handset, my fingers trembling as I reached for it. Static buzzed faintly, interspersed with unintelligible words, a voice, not Ronnie's. "Look closer," the distorted voice whispered. I dropped the handset, the sound continuing even as it hit the floor. My eyes darted to the map on the desk, the red X glaring back at me like a challenge. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't sit here and let this thing, whatever it was, toy with me. If the map was a clue, I needed to follow it. Caleb's journal might have been his warning, but it was also my guide, and right now, it was the only thing making any sense. I packed quickly, taking the rifle, the flashlight, and the map. The journal came with me, too, its weight a small comfort. Before I left, I turned on the floodlight, its powerful beam cutting through the morning fog, a beacon in case I needed to find my way back. The forest was colder than usual, the air biting at my face as I trudged through the snow. The map led me southeast, deeper into the trees. The further I went, the quieter it became, the snow muffling my footsteps, and the wind barely rustling the branches above. After an hour, I noticed something strange. The trees around me bore markings, deep gouges carved into the bark, forming crude, jagged shapes. They didn't look like natural damage. They looked deliberate, like someone or something had left them as a trail. The path led me to a clearing. At its center stood a stone circle, the gray rocks weathered and covered in moss. Symbols were etched into their surfaces, similar to the ones on the trees. In the middle of the circle was a pit, its edges uneven and crumbling. The air around it felt charged, like the static before a storm. I stepped closer, my breath visible in the frigid air. The pit seemed impossibly deep, its darkness swallowing the weak light of my flashlight. A faint hum emanated from within, the same sound I'd heard on the radio. As I stared into the void, I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. It was the figure, closer now. Its features were still obscured, its body a shadow against the snow, but its eyes, two pinpricks of pale, flickering light, locked onto mine. It didn't move, but its presence was suffocating, a pressure that pushed against every fiber of my being. The hum from the pit grew louder, resonating in my skull. I stumbled backward, my legs trembling as I tried to put distance between myself and the figure. But it didn't follow. It simply stood there, watching. And then, without warning, it raised a hand and pointed, not at me, but at the journal in my pack. The realization hit me like a bolt of ice. This wasn't about the map, or the tower, or even the forest. It was about the journal. I turned and ran, the figure remaining motionless as I fled. The sound of my footsteps seemed deafening in the stillness, my breath hitching with each frantic step. When I finally reached the tower, I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, slamming the hatch shut behind me. The journal was on the desk, its leather cover worn and unassuming. But it wasn't just Caleb's story anymore, it was mine too. The journal sat on the desk, daring me to open it again. Its pages felt heavier than they had any right to be, weighted with the chaos of Caleb's experiences and my own unraveling. Whatever I had seen in the clearing, it wasn't done with me. The figure's silent gesture toward the journal played in my mind on a loop. The question wasn't what it wanted, it was why it hadn't taken it, or me yet. I flipped through Caleb's entries again, searching for clarity. His words, once chaotic and frenzied, now felt methodical. He had been documenting something larger, piecing together fragments of an incomprehensible puzzle. March 24th. The pit wasn't natural. Something carved it, something old. The symbols, the humming, they pull at you. The map was my warning. If you see the X, don't go. Don't let it know you've seen the X. The pit. The map wasn't just a clue, it was a test. And I had failed. The rest of the day passed in restless silence. I busied myself with routine checks, scanning the forest for smoke, for movement, for anything that might explain what was happening. But the forest offered nothing, just an expanse of white and green, indifferent to my panic. The radio stayed silent, even as I adjusted the frequency and tried to reach Ronnie. His absence was unnerving, leaving me untethered to any sense of normalcy. My fingers hovered over the handset, debating whether to keep trying or to let the silence speak for itself. When the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I secured the tower for the night. The hatch was locked, the floodlight ready. I set the rifle within arm's reach and stared out the window as the darkness crept in. The knocking began at midnight. Knock. Knock. It was rhythmic, deliberate, louder than it had ever been. My pulse quickened as I gripped the rifle and approached the window. The flashlight beam swept over the stairs, but they were empty. Then the scraping began. It started faint, a subtle scratching against the wood, like nails dragged over the surface. But it grew louder, closer, until it sounded as though it was coming from every side of the tower. I backed into the cabin, my breath ragged, the rifle shaking in my hands. The journal sat on the desk, its presence almost mocking. My mind raced with Caleb's warnings: don't look, don't respond, don't break the rules. The scraping stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was worse, an oppressive void that pressed against my chest. And then I heard it: footsteps on the stairs, heavy, deliberate steps, each one resonating through the structure. They climbed slowly, methodically, as though savoring the ascent. My grip on the rifle tightened, my knuckles white. The steps stopped just below the hatch. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense. The hatch creaked slightly under pressure, as though something was testing its weight. I aimed the rifle at the trapdoor, my finger hovering over the trigger. But the hatch didn't open. Instead, a low, guttural hum filled the air, vibrating through the walls and into my chest. It was the same sound I had heard at the pit, amplified and suffocating. My vision blurred as the sound seemed to pierce my thoughts, pulling at something deep inside me. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. I woke up on the floor, the rifle beside me. The faint glow of dawn filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the cabin. My head throbbed, and my limbs felt heavy, as though I had been drugged. The journal was open on the desk, its pages fluttering in the breeze from the cracked window. I didn't remember opening it, but a new entry stared back at me in Caleb's frantic handwriting. March 25th. It will test you. It will take everything you have. But the journal is the key. Keep it close. Keep it safe. Don't let it leave the tower. My stomach churned. The words felt like a curse, binding me to the journal and its secrets. I slammed it shut and shoved it into my pack, determined to put as much distance between myself and the pit as possible. By mid-morning, I had made my decision. I would confront the X on the map. If the journal was the key, then the pit held the lock. Whatever was haunting this place wasn't going to stop until I faced it. The trek was grueling. The snow seemed thicker, the forest darker, as if the trees themselves were closing in. The journal pulsed in my pack, an almost living thing, its presence a constant weight on my mind. When I reached the clearing, the pit loomed before me, its edges glowing faintly with the strange symbols carved into the stone. The humming was louder now, resonating in my bones. And there it was, the figure. It stood on the far side of the pit, its form clearer than before. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs too long, its movements unnaturally fluid. Its eyes, those pinpricks of pale light, locked onto mine. And I froze. It raised a hand, pointing at the journal. The hum intensified, the air around me vibrating with its force. My grip on the journal faltered, and it slipped from my hands, tumbling toward the pit. The figure moved then, its body a blur as it lunged for the journal. But I reacted first, grabbing it mid-fall and clutching it to my chest. The figure stopped abruptly, its head tilting as though in curiosity. The hum faded slightly, replaced by a low, guttural growl. I backed away, the journal pressed tightly against me. The figure didn't follow, but its presence lingered, its eyes watching as I stumbled out of the clearing and back into the forest. When I returned to the tower, the sun was setting. My body ached, my mind racing with unanswered questions. The figure's reaction to the journal had been visceral, almost desperate. Whatever it wanted, the journal was the key. But Caleb's warnings echoed in my mind, don't let it leave the tower. That night, as the wind howled and the knocking resumed, I stared at the journal on the desk, its presence heavier than ever. The figure's silent message was clear, it wouldn't stop until I gave it what it wanted. Or until I found out why. The journal stared at me from the desk, its leather cover worn and unassuming, a sharp contrast to the chaos it had unleashed. The figure's reaction at the pit was burned into my mind. Whatever it was, it didn't want me. It wanted this. And yet, Caleb's warning was clear. Don't let it leave the tower. But why? What did the journal contain that was so important? My instincts told me the answers were close, and the journal was the key. Yet the questions gnawed at Meta. Why hadn't Caleb destroyed it? Why had I failed when I tried? And why did the forest feel alive when I carried it with me? I didn't have long to think. As the sun began to set, the wind picked up, and the now familiar knocking started again. Knock, knock, knock. It was louder this time, resonating through the tower's wooden frame like a battering ram. My body tensed as I grabbed the rifle. I scanned the windows, but the forest remained eerily still. The floodlight was my only weapon against the darkness, but Hank's warning echoed in my minder. Don't mess with the floodlight unless you have to. The knocking stopped. Silence fell, heavier than the wind or the creaking wood. And then, from the radio, came the sound I dreaded most, static. For a moment, I dared to hope it was Ronnie. Ronnie, are you there? I said, my voice trembling. The static crackled, and a voice emerged, not Ronnie's. Bring it back. The voice was deep, guttural, and filled with an inhuman resonance. My hands shook as I backed away from the radio. The journal sat on the desk, almost glowing in the dim light of the cabin. My gut told me it was connected to everything: the pit, the figure, the voices. But connected how? I opened it, flipping through the pages. Caleb's handwriting was frantic, his words barely legible in places. But one entry caught my eye. March 27th. The forest doesn't want us here. The journal isn't just a record, it's a tether to what? I don't know, but I can't let it go. If it leaves, so do I. A tether. The word sent a chill down my spine. Was the journal holding me here or holding something else back? The knocking resumed, faster and more violent, like fists pounding on the walls. Then came the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, ascending the stairs. My chest tightened as I aimed the rifle at the hatch, my finger on the trigger. The footsteps stopped just outside the trapdoor. Then came the voice again, not from the radio this time, but from directly above me, vibrating through the wood. It's not yours to keep. The trapdoor creaked, the hinges straining under pressure. My breath caught in my throat as I prepared to fire. The journal seemed to pulse on the desk, its presence overwhelming. My instinct screamed at me to throw it out, to rid myself of the cursed thing. But Caleb's words echoed in my mind: if it leaves, so do I. The trapdoor rattled but didn't open. Instead, the voice shifted, softer now, almost coaxing. You don't belong here. Let it go. I stood frozen, torn between two choices. If I kept the journal, the figure would never stop coming. If I let it go, I might survive. But at what cost? The trapdoor fell silent, but the tension in the air remained. My gaze shifted to the journal. I flipped through the pages again, searching for a clue, and found one final entry. March 28th. I made my choice. I threw it into the pit. It didn't save me. It only made it stronger. Eddie had tried to escape by giving it what it wanted, and he had failed. I stepped away from the desk, my thoughts racing. If the journal was a tether, then destroying it wasn't enough. It needed to be severed. But how? The wind howled outside, rattling the tower. The floodlight flickered, and the shadows seemed to move, stretching toward the cabin. My hands trembled as I picked up the journal, its weight somehow heavier than before. Then it hit me. The pit. The journal had come from there, or at least, it was tied to it. If I could destroy it, maybe I could return it to where it belonged. But doing so would mean venturing into the clearing again, facing whatever waited there. The thought sent a wave of fear through me, but I knew I didn't have a choice. The trek to the pit was agonizing. The snow seemed thicker, the forest darker, as if the trees themselves were closing in. The journal pulsed in my pack, an almost living thing, its presence a constant weight on my mind. When I reached the clearing, the pit loomed before me, its edges glowing faintly with the strange symbols carved into the stone. The humming was louder now, resonating in my bones. And there it was, the figure. It stood on the far side of the pit, its pale eyes locked onto mine. It didn't move, but its presence was suffocating. I stepped closer to the pit, the journal in my hands. The humming intensified, the air vibrating with energy. The figure tilted its head, watching as I approached. Return it. The voice was a whisper, yet it filled the clearing. I hesitated. Eddie's warning played in my mind. It didn't save me. It only made it stronger. But if keeping the journal meant staying trapped in this nightmare, then what choice did I have? I took another step toward the pit, the journal trembling in my hands. The figure remained still, its gaze unblinking. Then, with all the strength I could muster, I hurled the journal into the darkness. The moment the journal vanished into the pit, the humming stopped. The forest fell silent. The air stilled. The figure tilted its head again, then began to dissolve, its form breaking apart like smoke in the wind. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. The pit began to glow, a deep, pulsing red light emanating from its depths. The ground shook beneath my feet, and a sound unlike anything I had ever heard erupted from the void, a scream, guttural and primal, filled with rage and triumph. The trees around the clearing began to sway, their trunks groaning as if alive. The symbols on the stones pulsed, their glow intensifying. The pit wasn't closing, it was opening. I turned and ran, my heart pounding as the forest seemed to come alive around me. The trees moved, their branches clawing at me, the snow shifting under my feet. The scream followed me, growing louder, more deafening with each step. When I reached the tower, I slammed the hatch shut and collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. The radio crackled to life, and Ronnie's voice came through, urgent and panicked. "What did you do?" I threw it in," I stammered. A long pause, then in a voice filled with dread, Ronnie said, "You've made it worse." The days that followed were a blur. The forest never went silent again. The knocking stopped, but the hum persisted, faint yet constant, a reminder of the choice I had made. When the snowmobile arrived to pick me up, Hank didn't say a word. He glanced at the tower, then at me, his expression grim. I climbed into the sled without looking back. As we sped away, I felt a strange weight in my bag. My heart sank as I opened it and found the journal, its leather cover pristine, its pages blank. The pit had returned it, and now it was mine.